Good morning everybody, and welcome to the 42nd session of the International Peace Institute Vienna seminar. This year we have a really interesting topic, the uprisings, the future of North Africa and the Middle East. For the next 2 days we will be reflecting on the years since the uprisings, the current situation in the region, as well as the prospects for the future. This year we have also the added feature of live streaming this event. This enables us to reach a global audience in real time. To get it started, I would like to introduce to you the President of the International Peace Institute, Mr. Terry Larsen. As most of you know, Ambassador Larsen was instrumental in the Oslo peace process. He continues to be active in the region as the Secretary Special Envoy for the implementation of Security Council Resolution 1559. Previously, he was Kofi Annan's Special Coordinator for the Middle East process, and later envoy to Lebanon and Syria. In this capacity, he negotiated Israel's withdrawal from the southern Lebanon and established the Blue Line. A few years later, Ambassador Larsen negotiated with the President of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, Syria's military withdrawal from the Lebanon, the so-called Aleppo Understanding. Terry, we look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning everybody, and welcome once again to the 42nd Vienna seminar of the International Peace Institute. Probably, as I remarked over dinner yesterday, the IPI seminar has now the longest tradition of any seminar in Vienna. And I would like again to use the opportunity to thank our good partners, the Austrian Ministry for European and International Affairs, and the Austrian Federal Ministry of Defense and Sports for the wonderful cooperation that we have enjoyed in organizing this meeting. I would also like to thank the staff of the IPI Vienna office. Since the autumn of 2010, IPI's Vienna office has developed a growing number of partnerships and a growing portfolio of projects, particularly in relation to conflict prevention, transnational threats, and energy security. Most of all, I would like to thank all of the speakers and the chairs who have come, and some of you from a long way, to take part in this year's meeting. And thanks to all of you for coming here to participate. There is a high interest in this meeting because it is the hottest topic in international relations at the moment. Seldom in the history of the Middle East and North Africa have so many changes taken place so dramatically, so quickly, and at the same time. And with 24 hours, live news, and social networking, we can witness these uprisings in real time. Events in so many countries of the region have their own dynamic, but they're also part of a variable geometry that keeps shifting. As we speak, there are elections in Egypt, a civil war in Syria, growing instability in Lebanon, and the list goes on. It is our task not only to understand these changes, but to try to shape them for the sake of peace. To begin with that task, I would like to make a short presentation about the situation in the region and provide some prospects for the future. But before I do that, I cannot resist pointing to the fact that on the very ceiling that we are under right now, there are frescoes painted immediately, actually in the period from 1848 to 1850, immediately after the counter-revolutions, after the European upheavals, what we maybe can call the European Spring, in 1848. These works of art, as I just said, were completed in 1850, celebrating, actually, if you look at it, particularly the centerpiece, celebrating the counter-revolutions. So it's a bit of a paradox that we are gathered here, and maybe it's not very fitting, but it's so beautiful. So the counter-revolutions, they swept Europe and brought back old and new autocratic regimes, crushing the hopes of what was called liberalism at the time. May I particularly point to the mural in the right-hand corner over there, because here we can see, this is the Congress of Vienna in 1814, where we see Tsar Alexander I, we see Kaiser Franz I, and Frederick William III of Prussia. But to us, maybe more importantly, we have in the very corner, they are lurking there, as you can see, the two big legends of European diplomatic history, the two top icons of diplomacy in Europe, namely Fürst Metternich, who's standing, lifting his right arm there, and right behind him we have Prince Talleyrand of France, who were the two, as you all know, most formidable diplomats of the time. I think I can see that Mitterrand is about to turn his back to us, and maybe that is ominous for our deliberations here. We will see. I will come back a little bit to these parts of history, knowing well that these two gentlemen now are watching us carefully and maybe worryingly. So let me now dip into one of the substantive areas of IPI's work, namely the Middle East. What I will do is to address the current state of play in the Arab world more than 1 year after the start of the uprisings. The data I will present was gathered by IPI analysts. It is the result of field visits, interviews, and daily monitoring of the media, local, regional, and international, as well as the work of academics and experts outside of IPI. As of today, if you look at the screen, countries in the region are in different phases. The uprisings in Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, and Yemen are now at a crucial stage. 1 year ago, the energy of the people were focused on removing old regimes, but now the task is much harder, namely to create an alternative. In Syria, violence is raging uncontrollably, with the situation and the continuation of the regime's violent oppression. Opponents are increasingly turning to car bombs and suicide attacks. Morocco, Algeria, and Bahrain are witnessing varying degrees of political unrest. In Jordan, the king has just replaced the prime minister, the fourth since the uprising started more than 15 months ago. Other countries in the region have remained relatively stable for now. If there is one overarching theme across countries, it is the increasing complexity of transition. The optimism of the Arab Spring is turning into concern as various groups vie for power and the transition may falter. Egypt is a good example. In early 2011, there was an outpouring of hope. According to polling by Pew, only 34% of the population was unhappy with the way things were going. However, later that year, as economic realities set in, 73% saw themselves as struggling. We see a similar situation in Morocco, Syria, and Tunisia. But this is not unique to countries in transition. We also see very high levels of daily hardship in Algeria and in Bahrain. The pessimism is partly a reflection of broader economic trends. Economic demands were at the heart of the uprisings, but the situation has deteriorated considerably since. As you can see on the map, the economies of the countries experiencing transition in 2011 suffered. There have been dramatic drops in GDP in Libya and Yemen. Also, Tunisia has experienced negative growth. The drop in growth in these countries exacerbated a decline in foreign direct investment over the past few years. In Egypt, it plunged from 6.4 billion in 2010 to 500 million last year. In Libya, it dropped from 3.8 billion to almost nothing. What is more worrying, though, are structural issues, such as the poor state of the government machinery, the continuing cost of subsidies, and big budget deficits. For example, the Egyptian deficit is 10% of the GDP, while food subsidies eat up 4% of the budget. This in contrast to the wealth and economic boom in most of the GCC countries. While growth can be a good reflection of a country's wealth, it is not always the best indicator of the average citizen's sense of prosperity. Here we have data on unemployment levels. Unemployment is high, and in the case of Morocco and Egypt, it has increased by 5% over the past year. In Tunisia, it is the #1 problem facing the government, with unofficial figures putting it at 20%. In addition, these countries face abnormally large youth populations. It is no hyperbole to say that the youth were a primary fuel for the uprisings. Unfortunately, these unemployment levels remain particularly high among the youth. Will these dire statistics make people regret the change of regime? Or worse, will it lead to counter-revolutions? In Egypt, we have an answer to this question. When asked by Gallup poll to choose between democracy and political stability, a majority of Egyptians still choose the former. However, if the economy continues to deteriorate, the answer may become political stability. But the economy is not the whole story. Trust in institutions across the Arab world is still relatively high. We see significant trust in the courts in Jordan, Kuwait, and in Egypt. Similarly, the police are relatively well regarded. Out of these countries, Egypt has the lowest level of trust. In Jordan, Palestine, and Kuwait, there are also high levels of trust in both the institutions of Prime Minister and Parliament. In Algeria, Morocco, and Kuwait, less so. It must be noted that Morocco and Kuwait had elections recently. Algeria is about to have them. And in Jordan, the cabinet is being reshuffled for the third time, as I've already said, in 15 months. One area where the Arab public seems to agree is on distrust of political parties. In addition to political parties, there is a widespread distrust in elections. But this is one area where countries in transition are different. In Tunisia, and especially Egypt, we see that the majority actually trust elections. Elections are producing a historical development in the region, namely the electoral victory of Islamic parties. In Morocco, 107 out of 395 seats went to the Justice and Development Party. In Tunisia, 89 out of 217 seats went to the Ennahda movement. In Egypt, 356 out of 508 to Freedom and Justice and Al-Noor. And most recently, in Kuwait, 14 out of 50 parliamentary seats went to Islamist parties, which together with 20 seats to the tribal-based lawmakers, gave the conservative bloc a clear majority. That said, Arab society remains split on attitudes towards political Islam. A slight majority, the red bar on the screen, is fearful of what Islamic rule could mean in terms of individual freedoms and a shift towards broader religious conservatism. Others, the grey bar, are attracted by the qualities displayed so far by Islamic parties and their leaders. These opinions are, however, in a state of flux. A poll by the Al-Aram Center for Political and Strategic Studies found that 45% of people who voted for the Brotherhood, Freedom and Justice Party in Egypt said they would not do so again. That means elections held today would give less seats to the Muslim Brotherhood. Egyptian Islamists blame their fading fortunes on unreasonably high expectations and a rigged political system. The reality, however, is that regardless of the reasons, public perceptions of political Islam will be dictated by their ability to deliver outcomes to the electorate, much the same as other political parties. We have seen what a delicate moment this is for the Arab world. The Arab Spring has created possibilities for progress that seemed unthinkable in the recent past. At the same time, the potential for chaos is all the more alive today. Egypt, one of the most important countries in the region, is celebrating presidential elections today and tomorrow. However, the president will be elected without a defined mandate and defined powers. Libya also plans its first elections under conditions of great instability, with the National Transitional Council having little authority outside the capital. The government in Tunisia is under sustained pressure to solve unemployment, and the country remains restive. Yemen is treading a very fine line, with the new president trying to reform and reunify the security forces and risking retaliation. Morocco and Jordan, like other monarchies in the region, are under strain trying to accommodate demands for greater political reforms and freedoms. Looking ahead at the regional political landscape, two revolutions come to mind. As I've already said, that of 1848, but also that of 1989. The European revolutions of 1848, after significant human toll, failed. And in most countries, more autocratic regimes filled the vacuum left by their predecessors. In 1989, the revolutions of the Eastern European countries succeeded, in large part in establishing democratic institutions and civil liberties. So why did 1989 succeed where 1884 failed? As I see it, the answer, simply put, is that the regional environment of Europe in the late 1840s was not conducive to successful democratic institutions. In 1989, on the other hand, there were institutional frameworks which were in place to give strong incentives for a lasting reform agenda, namely that of the European Union, the NATO, CSCC, now OSCE, and the Council of Europe. In other words, the neighborhood enabled successful transitions in 1989. These regional institutions provided much-needed economic and security incentives to develop systems of legitimate and accountable governance. To me, the most important question facing regional stability in the Middle East is, are the existing institutions like the Arab League, the GCC, and the OIC enough to provide such a framework? My inclination is to say probably not. Notwithstanding the enhanced and productive political role that these institutions have played throughout the crisis. If the answer indeed is no, is it feasible to establish a new organization in the region to assist states in transition? This would require a coalition of wealthy and stable states in the region, together with key players in the international community. The futures of some of these countries, such as Egypt and Syria, do not only have domestic implications. They raise the question of regional stability, a question of war and peace, which is most starkly illustrated by the recent spillover of the Syrian crisis into Lebanon. Looming large over all these developments is the specter of potential military conflict over the nuclear facilities in Iran. In several countries in the region, there is a clear perception that Iran not only has nuclear military ambitions, but also aspires to regional hegemony and dominance. Iran says otherwise, but as we know, it's perceptions that drive actions. A major regional war would have cataclysmic consequences for the region and for the whole global community. My view is that the most important step towards preventing and managing this crisis would be the establishment of a regional institution for economic cooperation, assistance, and political trust. Such an institution should also encompass the major international players and donors beyond the region. This comprehensive and holistic approach would be necessary to mobilize sufficient resources over probably a long period of time to sustain a successful long-term transition. Such an organization would reflect the uniqueness of the conflicts of the Middle East, because these are not only conflicts, are the only conflicts in the world which are not only local and regional, but also truly global, along dimensions of economics, politics, and religion. Initiatives such as the OSCE, the Council of Europe, and the more contemporary Arctic Council could help inform the creation of new organizations for cooperation, if desired by key players. These are questions and issues which we hope will be a topic for the discussions here over the next 2 days. Today, as I see it, the only thing that is certain is uncertainty. Today, the only thing that is predictable is unpredictability. The task is to ensure that the spark of revolution and reform will ignite a beacon of hope and not a wildfire of despair and destruction. Thank you for your kind attention. May I ask the panelists to come and sit with me here on the podium. It is a great pleasure for me to welcome both speakers. They are both distinguished members of the international foreign policy establishment. On one side, a politician and diplomat, and on the other side, a reporter and journalist and commentator and author and analyst. Our first speaker is Abdul Karim El Irani. Abdul Karim is if I may say so, the kingmaker in Yemen. He was a close advisor to the previous president and is now an advisor to the new president. He is therefore, I can see he's blushing a bit now, perhaps the key figure in the current transition process in Yemen. He is one of Yemen's most experienced politicians, having served as a government minister almost continuously since 1974. And I think the only competitor in the region is actually the President of Israel, who I think also started his career in the mid-1970s. Abdul Karim has also a doctorate from Yale University, where he studied biochemistry and genetics. Abdul Karim is a very well-respected statesman, and he has a deep knowledge of the Middle East. And we are therefore glad to have him with us to talk about vulnerabilities and triggers for the uprisings. Our next speaker is a very good friend of IPI, American author and award-winning journalist, Robin Wright. Robin has a distinguished career, reporting from over 140 countries. I didn't think that was possible, but apparently it's true. For major media players including CBS News, Washington Post, The New Yorker, and Time. She's also been a fellow at the US Institute for Peace, the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, the Brookings Institution, Carnegie Endowment for Peace, as well as Yale, Duke, Stanford, and University of California. How do you get the time to do all this? Her most recent book is entitled Rock the Casbah, Rage and Rebellion Across the Islamic World. It won the Overseas Press Club Award in 2012 for the best book on international affairs. And of course, I can't resist to tell the audience here that it was launched at IPI in New York. Robin, thank you for being with us. And then with these words, Abdul Karim, I give you the floor.
Thank you very much. I feel very humbled to participate with such distinguished persons like you and our Rock the Casbah author. But I have to do my job. Thank you very much. And it is with great pleasure in this 42nd Vienna seminar on the uprising, the future of North Africa and the Middle East. In this occasion, I would like to express my thanks to IPI President, Mr. Terry Larsson, and the Austrian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Austrian Ministry of Defense for inviting me to participate in this important session. The title of this session is Dry Wood and Matches, Vulnerability and Triggers for the Uprising. Looking back to the so-called Arab Spring, as it was in January 2011, I would call it today dry straws and matches. To me, this means that the idealistic youth of Tunisia, Egypt, Yemen, and Libya, who triggered the Arab Spring in these countries, each in their own way, did strike a match which led the way to change and were very visible during the short duration of the glow of the burning piles of straw, but quickly disappeared from the scene and let the change take its own way. Today, the idealistic youth of the Egyptian revolution are nowhere to be seen in the competition for presidential election. With that provocative introduction, I will limit my talk to the spring in Yemen. Almost a year ago, I participated in a seminar held in Madrid and sponsored by the Club of Madrid. It was also about the Arab Spring. There I disappointed many of the Arab Spring enthusiasts, for I said the spring is for sure followed by hot summer. and then a moderate fall and very cold winter. Actually, I was alluding to the situation of the youth revolution in Yemen. That revolution happened immediately after the fall of the regime in Egypt. If anyone compares Yemen with Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, and Syria on the basis of the standard of human and social development as at the standard of the United Nations, Yemen would have been the last country to become a flowering Arab Spring. The educated elite and the economic middle class are essentially a drop in the ocean of 50% illiteracy and 75% rural population. However, during the first month and a half of the uprising, which started in Change Square in front of the University of Sana'a, had spread to Taiz, Aden, Eb, and Hudaydah in the so-called freedom squares. And these squares started attracting tens of thousands of mostly uneducated young, led by the educated youth of men and women. However, the Black Friday of March 18th, 2011, when over 50 persons of the youth were killed after the Friday prayer, triggered a radical change in the fate of the youth revolution in Yemen. 3 days after that Friday, the most important military commander and the right-hand man of President Ali Abdullah Saleh, named Ali Muhsin al-Ahmar, mutinied and split the army, the society, and eventually the youth revolution in Yemen became militarized and tribalized. Had it not been to the GCC initiative, which now is the basis of the current transition, Yemen most likely would have plunged into full-scale civil war. Now, can we say that the Arab Spring in Yemen has not produced a change? The answer is clear no, for the following reasons. Firstly, the active participation of young men and women in the protest squares in a scale previously unknown in the history of Yemen has been remarkable. And more remarkable, a young lady, only 32 years old, became the queen of the squares. Her name is Tawakkul Karman. She eventually shared the Nobel Peace Prize with 2 African ladies. That has created a remarkable change in the role of women in Yemen. It would have not been possible without the Arab Spring in Yemen. Secondly, the youth revolution in Yemen has made it impossible for any young or old army officer to ride a tank, issue a communique, and declare himself the leader. Nor is it any more possible for a ruler of a country to rule for decades as it was in Yemen, Egypt, Tunisia, and Libya. Thirdly, it has become now impossible to rule by a centralized regime dictating fiat from Sana'a. The system of governance must and will change in Yemen as a result of the Arab Spring. Fourthly, to maintain Yemen unity, a form of decentralized system with wide-reaching local authority must be accepted. It may be called local governance or local autonomy or a federal system of several regions. But it's a change that is unavoidable, and the current system has become unsustainable. Ladies and gentlemen, I have exceeded my time, but I must end using a colloquial expression, where is the meat? And I must say, where are the youth? The answer is in Yemen. They will be sine qua non members in the upcoming national dialogue, which will draft a constitution and which hopefully will lead to a radical change in the system that was not predictable over 15 months ago. Perhaps that is the maximum that we can offer our youth today, is to be members of the national dialogue. Maybe a traditional and tribal society like Yemen can offer them only that much. However, the future is theirs for sure, and I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Abdul Karim, for those words of, I think it's not an exaggeration to say, of immense clarity. Personally, I did not find them very provocative, but there might be others here who find them provocative. We will see when the discussion starts. Before I give the floor to Robin, may I ask you two questions? And one is the conditions which you just described, which has made change, as you put it, unavoidable, and has made the current state of affairs unsustainable. Do you think the same conditions are present in all or some of the other states in the region and societies which are going through a transition now? That's my first question. The second one, I will go back to what I said at the end of my presentation. Do you think that it is necessary to establish such a regional institution, which I pointed to, in order to reorient and move things in, if I may put it, the right direction? Two questions.
Thank you very much. I think change is happening everywhere. Now, the outcome of that change is different in every country, but the trend is not, in my view, very encouraging. However, a change leads to, I think, some disappointment and later on some success. I believe that the masses in the Arab world have rejected the current regimes and will not accept return to the situation ante. With regard to institutions, I must say, I think dictators and autocrats have been playing with these institutions, and they have not been able to accentuate the change that was needed. And therefore, new institutions have to be built from scratch, and they must be grassroots based.
Thank you very much so far. Robin, may I start with you with a small question?
Sure.
When the revolution started in Tunisia and in Egypt, there was a euphoria in Western capitals, including in Washington, and it actually also goes for the media, where there was a notion that the dictators would fall and Western-style democracy will flourish tomorrow. Was that very naive? And how come it was, in my opinion, as naive as I'm sure you will also say it was? May I start there?
You can start there. I actually, taking the long view, having covered the Middle East since 1973, I'm a little bit more optimistic. I do think that the next decade is going to be more turbulent than the last decade was. But I think in the long term that the process that has begun in the region really does carry a lot of hope. We were naive in anticipating that we could flick a switch and after 18 days you could take a country that dates back 5,000 years and hope that democracy would be created overnight. But I do think that what we've seen in the last, basically since 2005, is a set of circumstances that began to change the entire region, and that are the reason that when we look at what comes next, that we understand that the basics have changed. Whether it's the fact that Al Jazeera was the first of the independent satellite television stations to introduce news in a language that was familiar to the region and circumvent state control. But what's so fascinating is that today, in the intervening 15, 16 years, you have the emergence of over 500 satellite television stations in the region, in Arabic, independent of state control. And they cover the gamut. Some are small, some are large, some have not survived very long. But in the process, they have introduced the very idea of diversity. And so when we look at why is it that you have an active generation today, it is because they have grown up with the idea of diverse visions being presented to them by a whole range of television stations that will have different clerics giving their own versions of what is Islam and what is tolerable, what is acceptable, what is the way to lead a good Muslim life. It is another basic in the fact that, with the exception of Yemen, that most Arab countries today have surpassed that point where the majority are literate. They may not have high school degrees, but they can read and write. And you intersect that with access to technology, and that has given them the means to look beyond their neighborhoods. And it includes women. And when you democratize or bring in half of your population, that changes the dynamics right there. You look at the two most repressive societies in the Middle East, Iran and Saudi Arabia, and over 60% of the university student body today is female. So again, you have changed some of the basics. The mere fact that there is a sense, because of education, because of technology, of what's going on globally, and that you find this part of the region is very aware of the bigger stakes, in some ways more than my own countrymen are. They have a sense of, and they want to be very much a part of globalization. So while I agree with you that yes, we were naive, all of us were, in hoping that we would see change happen faster, that no matter what happens in terms of elections, what happens in terms of the failure to address a lot of the needs in the region, that the basics have changed in a way that ensure that long term, that what's happening in the region is very much the same as the kind of transitions we've seen play out with the end of military dictatorships in Latin America, the end of apartheid and minority rule in Africa, the end of communist rule in Eastern Europe. Now, change takes a long time, and the one thing we've seen, whether in Russia today, you have a former communist and KGB chief in power who could be there till 2024. A generation after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Today in South Africa, the majority of blacks are worse off today than they were under apartheid. The average lifespan when Nelson Mandela walked to freedom was 60 years. Today it's 41. This is a tangible way of judging the future. In Eastern Europe, women are worse off today than they were under communist rule when it comes to the number of women in power in politics. So change takes a long time, and this is where 18 days in Egypt or 30 days in Tunisia does not bring about change overnight. But there is a culture of change, I think, in the region that permeates, and it's the reason that while I think the next decade will be tough, I think that down the road there is, that the basics are there for a broader transition.
Thank you very much, Robin. Would you, Abdul Karim, would you comment?
I would like to ask that, or to comment that women education in the GCC countries is at a very high rate, but it has never produced, let's say, a critical mass to change the role of women. What do you think?
Oh, I agree. Look, but I also think we've crossed the threshold in the same way we did in my lifetime in the United States, that women no longer count on men to change things for them. We've crossed the threshold where women in the region have turned out, whether it's at Tahrir Square or in Damascus or in Yemen, whether they wear a hijab or not, and they are beginning to say, we know that we need to change things for ourselves. And I think that's, as important as anything, again, in explaining why there is change and why that down the road, women aren't going to be giving up. They may not have been able to gather 1 million women at Tahrir Square in March last year, because they were harassed by men, because they were unable to pull that many women together. But I don't think women have given up. I think women are as invested in this process of change in virtually every country. In fact, there's a wonderful book called The Girls of Riyadh. And if you want to get a sense of what really goes on in even a place like Saudi Arabia, and understand why what we see in terms of the coverage of everyday life, I recommend this book.
Thank you. I have read.
Thank you to both of you. Before I open the floor, let me bring up 2 other topics. One is the broader political landscape of the region. When I travel in the region, my impression is that that landscape has changed fundamentally. That US influence and respect and ability to listen and take seriously US policy has receded dramatically. And also because of the situation in Egypt, of course, I believe strongly this is a temporary phenomenon, that also Egyptian diplomatic leadership role in the region has receded dramatically. Some traditional players, key players like Saudi Arabia, Iran and Israel are still in place, but 2 new players have moved in and into the vacuum here. And that is in particularly Turkey, who has become a major player. I saw an opinion poll pointing out that if we go back only 5-6 years, the 2 most popular leaders of the region were Hassan Nasrallah and Ahmadinejad. Today they are down in the pits, and Mr. Erdogan is the most popular leader in the region, which also points to very significant changes, not only in the political realities, but also in the perception of leadership, in the region. So my question to you is this a temporary phenomenon? Is it for good? Is it for bad? And can you explain to us, Robin, first, why this receding leadership and presence of the US in the region has happened, if you would agree with what I said?
Oh, I agree completely. Shibli Telhami, whom many of you in this room may know, a scholar, American scholar, who's based at the Brookings Institution and the University of Maryland, did a poll that came out Monday. And he found, it was just of Egypt, and he said attitudes towards the United States in Egypt were 85% unfavorable, which is the lowest it's ever been. He also found that on the US presidency, 73% of respondents preferred Mitt Romney over 25% for Barack Obama, which shows just how unpopular Obama is at the moment, which is a striking number given how popular he was when he gained the presidency. Look, this is a moment that the United States faces a real dilemma, and that is how to be involved, how to be credible. I have a lot of friends in Egypt who were delighted when the government cracked down on the NGOs, the non-government organizations, picked up 43 of them, eventually allowed several of the Americans to leave, because they felt the United States was meddling. In the aftermath of Iraq and Afghanistan, there is a very deep, as we all know, suspicion of what US motives are in the region. And this is a moment I've said to many of my friends who are in the foreign policy community, stand back. You can help them economically, but when it comes to the idea of helping write constitutions or helping train candidates who want to run, that we will be seen always to be wanting to help those who are our friends or who are more pro-Western, and that will not serve our interests in the long term. The tragedy is now, because of the world economic situation and the American economy, is that there will not be a Marshall Plan, there will not be the resources available. But there is a role the United States can play when it comes to things like small and medium-sized enterprise, helping jumpstart some to create job opportunities. Last month I went to Tunisia, and I went to Sidi Bouzid, where the young fruit vendor set himself on fire. And I went back to the same street corner and talked to the same fruit vendors who worked with Mohamed Bouazizi. And I asked, what do you think about what's going on? What role should there be for the United States? And they all said the same thing. We have many more freedoms today, but we have far fewer jobs. And the one thing we want from the United States is help in generating employment. And I was really struck by the fact that, remember, Mohamed Bouazizi did not set himself on fire because he wanted to vote for a different political party. He challenged the regime, tried to shame the regime because all he wanted to do was work. And that's an issue that is reflected in the themes, the language that is used by the protesters in whatever country, and that is social justice, dignity. It is the idea of giving them some sense of control over their lives, and they're more concerned about that, I think, economically even than they are politically. And that's where the United States can play a role. And I'm not sure the United States fully embraces that or fully understands that yet.
I'd like to come back to that in a minute. Abdul Karim, it's not only so that both American and I would say also European Union influence in the region, along a political dimension at least, has receded dramatically. As I said, Turkey has been moving in to become a very, very important player. But can you explain to us why Qatar has become such a significant player?
Oh,
being
very simple
small
answer.
and very
Money.
energetic. Okay. Would you elaborate further?
You know, during the 60s, Kuwait was the same like Qatar. And the story goes that King Faisal, the late King Faisal, was told about the Big Four. If you remember, during the Cold War, there was the Big Four. He said, no, there are 5. They said, how come? He said, Kuwait also number 5. Recently, Saud al-Faisal was told the same story. He said, now it's Qatar.
Yeah, but I mean, many of these countries have tons of money. But Qatar has become
I think
the spearhead of diplomacy from that part of the region.
That's true.
So
I
money
think
can't explain everything.
The seed was Al Jazeera, as mentioned. I think they became more enthusiastic to be involved in change. Al Jazeera created the appetite for the Qatari rulers to become more and more active in the Middle East. And they have mediated practically every conflict, including Yemen. At the beginning, they were the mediator number 1 during the spring in 2011. But by the mid-year, they withdrew because they were disappointed with the behavior of the president. Now they have not returned back fully. However, they are still very active everywhere. Self-consciousness in the Gulf country is very high.
Thank you for those remarks. Would you agree with Robin's analysis of the U.S. role and what the U.S. can do and should do and shouldn't do?
I think, unfortunately, the U.S. is in a dilemma. I think they have none of the previous 3 or even 4 presidents, even though Clinton was better, have delivered peace to the Middle East. Everybody was betting on a U.S. president who comes and delivers peace with the terms that most Arab countries have accepted. And the majority, in my view, but my friend Yussi may correct me, the majority in Israel still hope for peace according to the normal discussion going on today. This has created, I think, a backlash in the United States. That's one. The second one, the earlier support of these regimes that all have fallen, I think also created a backlash to the United States. The role of the European Union, of course, is not that very visible, whether in the peace process, they are almost in the backyard, or in the support of, let's say, ex-dictators. Therefore, that is a backlash on the United States. The role of Turkey, I think, is becoming very significant for several reasons. I always say, I pray for Islam as it is in Turkey. I think liberal Islam is a great model in Turkey now. The openness and the drive that they have not forgotten is to join the European Union. At the same time, the direction, looking in the direction of the East, has become, I think, economically useful, lucrative, and therefore the role of Turkey will continue to be very popular in the Arab world. At the same time, Turkey today is more trusted than Iran, frankly, because Iran is trying to spread Shiism into Sunni communities. The Sheikh of Al-Azhar last week invited the charge d'affaires of the Iranian government and officially declared, we are against spreading Shiism. And therefore, as a counterpart to the Iranian creeping influence, I think Turkey is a good, what do you call it, adversary in a political way, not military.
In other words, there seems to be a consensus amongst the panelists here that we indeed have a new geopolitical landscape in the Middle East with very significant power changes, new players, a new perception of old and new players, which is a part of the new political realities there. I'd like to drill a little bit on Bouazizi and identity. Because as far as I can recall, Bouazizi was not, as a street vendor, he was not particularly poor. But the police tried to close his shop because he didn't have a license. So he went to the governor, or the governor's office, and asked to see the governor or some senior official, and said, I will kill myself if I don't get access. But you know the details here. So,
well, the story is a little exaggerated. He didn't have a shop. He had a little cart. And in fact, when you go to Sidi Bouzid now, there's a monument that's been set up right where he set himself on fire. And it's a large stone cart pushing over several thrones, each of them signifying how the ripple effect across the region. And yes, he was harassed by a Tunisian official demanded a bribe, a $7 bribe. Can you imagine $7 and what it unleashed across the region? But I think, you know, you mentioned the word identity, and I think this is where, when we talk about Islam, this is the most interesting thing that's happened, arguably, over the last year and a half, is the emergence of a whole new Islamic spectrum. If you divorced from the extremists, there are today, in 14 of the 22 Arab countries, there are over 50 nonviolent Islamist groups that they've all renounced violence, and they are all part of the political system. And they fall into a wide range of categories. But it is, in most cases, not about piety in politics. It is about identity. And that's what's very hard for those of us in the outside world to understand, because any woman who wears a hijab is seen as someone who is fundamentalist, when in fact it is often about putting on the scarf so that she can be active. She can use the space around her to do things that she might not be able to do, or family wouldn't allow her to do if she didn't have hijab on. This again is kind of, the new dynamics are quite interesting. There are whole new categories of Islamic activism. The classic Islamists, the neo-Islamists, the post-Islamists, the Salafi Islamists, and each one has categories. We have just among the Salafis, you have the neo-Salafis, you have the scientific Salafis, the scholarly Salafis, and then you have something called the Costa Salafis, who are named after a coffee chain where the young Salafis hang out in Cairo. That there is such a broad range, but this is getting back to why is it that Islam is filling this void, and it is in part because of the vacuum. One of the things that's most interesting about the election in Egypt today is that you have this range of Islamic parties, often that snipe at each other. I went to see both members of parliament from the Brotherhood and from the Noor Party after they were elected in January. And to hear the Muslim Brotherhood dismiss the Noor Party and say, oh, they're extremists and they're immature, they've only been formed as parties since last summer. And then you go see the Noor Party, and they say, oh, the Muslim Brotherhood, they've compromised their Islamic ethics. They're not really Muslim, politicians anymore. And this dynamic is really quite interesting because the stakes today in the region are who is going to lead political Islam. They reject Iran as a model, and they reject Saudi Arabia, a religious monarchy. And Turkey, in the meantime, is the kind of model they like, but it's really not the terms they want over the long haul. And so they're looking for whether it's leadership by a party, by an individual, by a visionary. And that's what we're beginning, why the election in Egypt will be so important as the heart and soul of the Arab world.
Thanks, Robin. I think this requires one comment from you before I open the floor.
I wish I'm as optimistic as my colleague about the Salafis. I think they are superstitious.
Oh, yeah.
For a preacher to say that a friend of him had a dream while sleeping in Medina when Muhammad appeared and said, how is my friend, what's his name, the head of the, who was discredited from election?
Speak up.
Salah Usman. If that kind of thinking in the 21st century, that goes deep into some youth, I know, but that does not make me optimistic.
I'm not optimistic about the Salafis, trust me.
Good.
Okay, shall we end this round there? I will now open the floor. If you could stretch up your hands when you want to take the floor. And please, since not everybody knows everybody here, if you can state your name and also your affiliation. I think actually I will call upon one person first and see, since his name was mentioned, namely Yossi Beilin, who is here with us, the former Minister for Justice of Israel and a range of other key positions in many Israeli governments. Yossi, would you like to comment on it? I noted yesterday that the two of you were chatting very amicably, so I'm very curious about the dialogue between you. Yossi, you have the floor.
No, very good too.
Thank you. I think that you are right by saying that the most important variable is that the fact that we don't know. And we know enough to be humble by now. It is very, very important because we are in the midst of a movement. And when we meet in 10 years or 20 years, which I'm sure will happen, it will be much easier for us to understand what is really happening, besides the fact that it is much more liquid than before. That something which was seen as a stone is becoming something like water. And we don't know whether it will boil, it will become ice or whatever. Maybe one unimportant comment that I'm thinking about, listening to the very interesting interventions, is that the fact that the Muslim brothers are going to be very dominant, if not the only dominant force in the coming years, is, from a scientific point of view, mind-boggling, because they did not really, if I may say so, prepare themselves for this moment They thought about a long range in which they will be able to prepare themselves to think what they really want to do, how are they going to do it, milestones, stages, and suddenly the world is saying to them, hey, it's fine, rule us, tell us what to do. The fact that the president is going to be elected this day and tomorrow without a constitution is really a very, very interesting situation because they are not prepared. We are never prepared for revolutions. Now, historically speaking, I believe that it is conducive to splits in almost all these movements. Between those who would say they are not Muslims anymore, which is usually the case. They are not Jews anymore, they are not Christians anymore, whatever. It is always said, always, as if it had never been said before. And on the other hand, the loyalists, the Salafists or the part of the Muslim brothers who do not betray the cause, who do not change their views because of their changing reality. And those who will be the Muslim brothers in power, who will compromise, who will become politicians, real politicians, who have to create coalitions, who have to give something in order to get something, they might be I don't know whether Turkey is one of the models. It doesn't have to be the model. I mean, what Ataturk did to Turkey, including the abolishment of the Arabic letters, is far too much, which created very, very extreme reactions too. So it doesn't have to be Turkey, but it might be something very, very different. Now, speaking as somebody who lives in this region, I would not like to be, generally speaking, part of an experiment. But I must say that as a political scientist, it is one of the most beautiful experiments one could think about.
Thank you very much, Yossi. I will take two more interventions before I go back to the panelists. So I think I will start on the front bench here. Please state your name and affiliation. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm the ambassador of Turkey in Vienna. I'm Mrs.
Maybe you could rise. I think it's easier
okay.
to...
I'm the ambassador of Turkey in Vienna, Ayşe Sezgin. Mr. President, I would just, if you allow me, you have alluded to two revolutions which are very important in the history of humanity, I would say, 1948 and 1989. And I will also try to cover what happened afterwards. Of course, 89 was a very important turning point in the sense that it was a geopolitical earthquake, which the epicenter was Russia and the ex-Soviet geography. And then we have, therefore, that was a geopolitical, I would say, earthquake. And then after 10 years, we have 9/11, which was a security earthquake. And then when we come to 2011, we are confronting two major earthquakes, one political and one economic. The economic is the crisis which we are witnessing in Europe, and the second one is the Arab Spring. You have also touched upon the role of Turkey in the region. What I would say is that it is a fact that Turkey's role is very much appreciated in the region, but it's a matter of being on the right side of the history. Turkey, from the beginning, has been on the right side of the history by giving support to the legitimate demands of the people, which are freedom, justice, and dignity. In that sense, I think that has, in the hearts and minds of the people, has really created and made the difference. As regards Turkey being a model, from the beginning, we all know that the dynamics of every country is different from one another. We have never said that we are a model. We have always extended a hand, and we are just an inspiration for those who really want to be inspired by the democratic institutions, by the economic development that we have achieved in the last years. So we're not insisting that we're a model, but just an inspiration. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I can't hesitate asking you a question. Some of my friends in the region are whispering cautiously about neo-Ottomanism and the neo-Ottomans.
I will totally refuse that because everybody would accept the cultural, social, historical ties we have with the region. And it is not only with that region, we have the same ties with the Balkans, with the Caucasus. It is natural that a huge empire, after it has fusioned into a nation state, keeps the relationships and the friendly approach to the nations, which are also looking with the same approach towards Turkey. So this is a natural, very natural, and I will totally refuse. I know, I read those things also, those comments, but it is just a matter of responsibility, which is also bestowed upon us by the countries concerned, and also the historical, cultural, social relationships and ties we have kept along. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think you would make a great professor of history. May I take another question before we go back to the panel? The gentleman over there. Valerie. There we go.
Thank you very much. Volker Pertes from the German Institute for International Security Affairs in Berlin. I guess I have two questions. The one is clearly to Abdulkarim Al-Aryani. We spoke about meddling, and that these revolutionary societies usually refuse meddling from abroad, and there's always a national or nationalistic aspect in these uprisings. But what we have seen in Yemen is that for reasons we may understand or not understand, foreign meddling, Gulf Cooperation Council meddling, did work in the end. It was certainly not in order to spread democracy. It was in order to probably save a certain form of stability, get transition around stable. It was very complicated, it was rough, but it worked. So the question is, do we have a Yemen model here to follow up on the Turkish model question? Do we have a Yemen model here of sort of guided transition by friends from outside? And I guess the question is particularly pertinent and important looking at the situation in Syria, where if we have a civil war, the parties inside the country certainly cannot agree among themselves. No one wants to intervene militarily. So could there be a quote-unquote Yemen solution? Maybe you can enlighten us by telling us how it actually worked in Yemen and whether it could work somewhere else. And the second question is probably to, in a slight and polite way, disagree with Terrier, who said that the Egyptians are losing their leadership. Now, that is certainly true for the last year and a half, but does a panel agree or disagree that once the elections, the presidential elections, are through in Egypt, and Egypt has re-established, or let us say established, legitimate authority for, well, probably the first time for a long time, that this will have enormous regional effects, and that actually the elections in Egypt today are regional elections in a way, or elections with an enormous regional bearing. It could be, well, we don't know, it could be the first democratic elections where a Muslim Brotherhood candidate actually loses. So it would be interesting to see how they react. So I think the regional repercussions could be enormous. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great interventions and difficult questions. Let me just comment on the last intervention. I actually think I qualified, and my position is exactly the same as yours. But my question mark is, how long time will it take before Egypt revives? Because one scenario is that Amr Moussa becomes the next president, then you will have, in a way, three political entities: the military, the parliament, and the presidency. And then, since, as several pointed out here, there is no constitution, there is no defined mandate, there is no defined powers of the president, etc., it's completely open-ended. And then with three entities with possibly three different interests, this might actually prolong such a process, which will be exacerbated by the difficult, to put it understated, economic circumstances which Egypt is in. I think one of the interventions left me with no other choice but to start with you, Yemen as a model.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure if Yemen is a model because the meddling of the GCC countries came to Yemen on the basis of commitment from the top leaders who split, and they are very close family members and military colleagues, Ali Abdullah Saleh and Ali Mahsen al-Ahmar. After the 21st of March 2011, 2 days later, they met, both of them met in the house of the vice president and declared that both of them are ready to leave. And therefore, the president will resign after 30 days and the vice president will take over, and then the transition period will start. So the GCC meddling came with a recipe, already local recipe on which they worked. Had they come on their own initiative, I think they would have failed. Therefore, the success of meddling, quote unquote, which I don't like, in Yemen is based on a total, in local circumstances, which is totally different in Syria. Syria, there is a complete rejection of any meddling, even though now Kofi Annan is half meddler in that game. Therefore, Yemen today is a good example of external interference or meddling to accentuate a local agreement. Had it come initially from the GCC countries, it would have not been accepted. And many GCC countries, when the president refused to sign on the 22nd of May, on that day, I was representing the ruling party. I signed the GCC initiative. So at the end, he refused to sign, and it dragged on until the 23rd of November of the same year. By the time, the meddlers have become 10, not 5, because of the UN Security Council interference. Now they are 14, by the way. Turkey has become a meddler, quote unquote. Germany, because it was not a member of the GCC, it has joined. The United Nations, as UNDP and so on, have now joined the meddlers, and therefore 14 meddlers are there today with the European Union. Qatar is still away, so I expect that in a couple of months they will be 15 dealing with Yemen. And I don't like it, but I think we have to have it.
Thank you. Again, clarity. Robin, would you like to comment?
On Yossi's point, I actually think you've identified something that's really important, and that is the fragmentation, even among a party like the Muslim Brotherhood, which is incredibly disciplined. You can identify at least 4 different factions now within the Brotherhood. And many of, the same challenge we're seeing play out politically in terms of demographics with the young challenging the geriatric autocrats, you find also playing out within movements as well. And that's true of the younger generation of the Brotherhood challenging the geriatric leadership of the Brotherhood, including a young blogger named Ibrahim Hudaybi, whose grandfather and great-grandfather were both supreme leaders of the Brotherhood. And he broke away because he believed the manifesto was antiquated on Christians and women, forbidding them to be recognized as presidential candidates, and also because the Muslim Brotherhood did not elect its leadership democratically. So this is something that is going to play out, and I think be incredibly important down the road. We have not seen these parties in their final form. One point on the Brotherhood too, and the poll that came out Monday found that 71% of Egyptians believe that the Brotherhood made a mistake in running a presidential candidate after saying that they wouldn't. And there is, again, this sense that we're all in the West often convinced that because 70% of the parliamentary seats went to either the Noor Party or the Muslim Brotherhood, that reflected a religiosity, and it didn't. I think we're likely to be quite surprised by what happens in the Egyptian election, but it doesn't necessarily mean that people are looking. I don't think the Muslim Brotherhood is going to do well at all. I think Mohammed Morsi, as of Monday, according to every poll, was either placing 4th or 5th. Despite the discipline of the Muslim Brotherhood. So,
in this seminar I mentioned in Madrid, Abdul Men'im Abdul Futuh was a participant, and he surprised the audience by saying, he didn't call himself a former Muslim Brotherhood, but as a man who was raised in the Muslim Brotherhood, he has no objection for a woman to be a president or for a Coptic Christian Egyptian to be a president. And that was surprising to me.
Can I just add one quick thing? I think that we've talked so much about Egypt, but Tunisia really is an important country to cite as an example. And the fact is that Rashid Ghannouchi has gotten out and said, we're not going to change the constitution, which dates back to 1959, in terms of what it says about Sharia. That Prime Minister Jabali just had a press conference a couple of weeks ago in which he talked about we want the Western tourists to come back, and one of the things that was most notable was that he'd invited some journalists and travel agents and so forth, and there was quite a bar behind him. That there is, whether it's a pragmatism or a sense of reality, a sense of need, that a sense of compromise, that they can't create utopia, and that they can't provide answers without accommodation. And I think that accommodation, this idea, is one that's creeping into politics, whatever country it is.
Thank you so much. Before out of primarily sentimentality and also for balance, give the floor to Dr. Nabil Shaath, who is with us here, who is the foremost foreign policy creator and maker of Palestine. And when I say sentimentality, it's because for 2 decades I've been working with Yossi and Nabil on issues of common interest, so to speak. But before I give Nabil the floor, can I ask both of you a question? You have very clear analysis of why the upheavals happened and the factors which were driving them. But I only met one single person who predicted that the revolutions would happen, and that was actually Amr Moussa. I came from Israel. I met the whole leadership. I asked the question, what's actually going to happen in Egypt? They just laughed and said, Mubarak has complete control. The security apparatus is of such a stature that there's absolutely no reason to have any worries about Egypt. It will be stable for decades, and there will be a harmonious transition. Then I went to Cairo and I had dinner with Amr Moussa. He looked hard at me and he said, we cannot sustain this for more than a few months. This will explode. I mean, if we do not do something very rapidly, this will go completely down the drain. And he was the only person I met, I mean, of any nationality who said this. And my question is, why did nobody, except maybe this single personality, who might be president of Egypt within the next few days, why did nobody or very few people predict? Because if you look at the figures, and we've looked very hard at the figures, I mean, any qualified political scientist or sociologist should actually have predicted that this is not sustainable. Can I ask you the question first?
I think there are many reasons for the sudden burst of revolutions in the Arab world. I think dictatorship has lasted for a long time. Education has been spread significantly. And as Karl Deutsch says, that if you have a high level and a high standard of education without the educated elite participating in political decisions, you are always prone to have conflict. And Lebanon is a good example in the 70s. There was no political change, but there was a tremendous economic and educational change in Lebanon. The dictatorship created, I think, a self-destructing system within the regime. They did promote, particularly, especially in Tunisia, promote education. They promoted liberal way of daily life, but not a liberal way of political life. And I think that is the fermentation that led to revolution in Egypt. In Yemen, the conflict between the opposition and the ruling regime at that since 2006 has always been back and forth, and the people were attracted to the friction between the opposition and the regime. As soon as the youth moved in the square in Sana'a University, I think the society was already more or less split in the middle in terms of democracy, in terms of social justice, regarding extreme corruption. And the ruler, a friend of mine who was there for 33 years, I think people must be discussing.
Can I just tell you about a survey?
Sure.
It's very interesting. The US government commissioned a survey on why it missed the Arab Spring. And it's now online. Anyone wants to look at it, it's at stimson.org. Stimson is a think tank in Washington. And they broke down the world community into kind of 4 categories. Why, who got it right and who got it wrong. And the worst were the academics, because they were so locked into their paradigms that they couldn't see beyond, couldn't inject new ideas. The third worst were the intelligence communities, virtually everywhere, because they were unwilling to challenge conventional wisdom. The second best were the NGOs, because they lived with change on the ground. And I was telling Ed Mortimer this earlier. And the best were the journalists, because they had to report on what was happening every day. And it's a fascinating survey that goes into great length about who got it right, who was closest, and how some of the US intelligence reports particularly were just so dead wrong, right up to the very end, whether it was of Mubarak or President Ben Ali.
Thank you. Nabil.
I have questions for you. You made an excellent comparative study at the beginning. You started with this corner and other interesting parallels. You totally ignored Latin America. And I think the Latin American example is extremely important and useful in explaining what's happening in the Arab world today. Well, the Latin Americans started with Marxist regimes such as in Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and also the Peronista movement, which today has Cristina Kirchner as the president in Argentina. But the social democratic revolution that took over Latin America, ending military dictatorships and creating the new Brazils and the new Argentinas and the new other countries, more economically developed, democratic, and more independent of the United States, is very interesting. The emergence of a Lula da Silva or Pepe Mujica in Uruguay is something I think that needs to be learned from in the Arab case, not only from the American example and the Western, the European, the historical example and the East European example. I need your comment on this. I'm just a recent avoué of Latin America. So I've learned a lot recently about how things really have changed. And Latin America gave me a lot of hope about the Arab Spring. The 2 other comments, one is about Egypt. Egypt really is a very unique situation. These are 80 million people who've lived for 10,000 years without a split. I mean, since Ahmose united the Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt, Egypt has been a one unified country for such a very, very, very long time. And the Egyptians have a fantastic sense of humor, and I think might not be very scientific in explaining things, but it explains really how they are able to absorb conflicts and deal with them quickly over time. And I think it's very interesting that this experimental, sequential, haphazard democracy that have taken place in the last year, you know, electing a parliament before there is a law about, not even a constitution, but a clear law defining authorities, and then having that parliament work while the military are still ruling, and a cabinet that is chosen by the military does not report to the parliament. Very interesting. And then going to a presidential elections. And the presidential elections today and tomorrow will define the new ruler of Egypt, who doesn't know exactly what his authority is going to be. Seems haphazard, sequential, and not well studied, but it produced a fantastic result. The fastest learning curve of any revolution I've ever seen. The Egyptians are learning from this sequential democratic haphazardness. And I think had it not been for the election of the parliament, the Egyptians would have not really have learned about the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood lost half their popularity as a result of the mass media exposure of their parliament. And Egypt learning curve has been very fast. Another thing unique about Egypt is the people's aversion to violence. And I would really submit that all the violence that took place in Egypt during this revolution have been engineered by the security agencies and not by the revolutionaries. From the camel battle and go on. The Egyptian aversion to violence and readiness to settle things among themselves is also a very interesting sign of hope for a quick recovery of Egypt that might become the Brazil of the Arab world. Thirdly, my third comment is about not mentioning, although I know this is something I and Yossi and others will be discussing tomorrow, I think, but somehow you ignored the failure of the Israeli peace process as a factor in what's happening today in the Arab world. It's not mentioned anywhere. And I think this failure of particularly the Palestinian-Israeli peace process has a very important factor. And of course, the complacency of the United States about this, and the people seeing that really there is a lack of credibility about American commitment about the peace process and what really happened, particularly after the Obama hopes of stopping settlement activities and going back to a real two-state solution. That failure is also part of the explanation of what's happening today in the Arab Spring. It's also an explanation why Turkey has become very popular, because the Turks challenged Israel. And of course, there's other factors, a moderate Islam, an excellent economic policy. I mean, I'm not ignoring the others, but in terms of popularity in the Arab world, the Turkish more independent view of the Israeli-Palestinian, which looked to Palestinians as becoming more pro-Palestinian than ever before, has also helped gain Turkey popularity in the Arab world. Back to you on Latin America. Thank you.
As usual, Nabil, scoring points. My answer to you will be very brief. Your comment is very valid, very relevant, and you are, as usual, right. And if you have my next presentation, you will see that I talk a lot about Latin America. Yes, sure, I will give you the floor in a second. Then concerning Israel's role in the peace process, not in the peace process, you see, it's a Freudian slip here, in the upheavals in the Arab world. Actually, I've seen a range of polls which indicates that it actually didn't play a significant role at all. It was absent, more or less. And if you heard the slogans and you saw the banners, it was more or less absent. So, frankly, I don't think it played a significant role. I think it was, I mean, in 1848, when people demonstrated in the streets, they were carrying bread. So I think it was the living conditions dimension, and even more so the identity dimension. I think it was domestically centered, and it was not centered towards regional issues like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But would you like to comment on that first, maybe? And then Robin?
I think in the back of the mind of every Arab, the Arab-Israeli conflict stands clear, even with the youth. However, every youth revolution was dealing with an internal situation. It was logical that they don't extend it beyond the, let's say, national borders. But I do believe that the Arab-Israeli conflict is a very important reason for America unpopularity. At the same time, it is in the mind of every Arab citizen.
It's a wonderful question about Latin America. And one of the things that struck me the most when I went to see a man named Sheikh Kurdi, who was one of the Noor Party members of parliament, I asked him, who is your role model? And he said, Lula da Silva, a socialist from Brazil, by this man who had 10 children, 2 wives, only because the third one had just died. And he cited Lula da Silva because, and he talked about creating medical tourism like Brazil in Egypt. And I kept thinking, you know, if you know Egypt's medical facilities, he was saying that we want to be the regional center for any foreigner who has a medical problem. So Latin America has had a big influence in thinking. On your question about the Arab-Israeli conflict, I agree with Terry that it was just not a player, but it does reflect something. And that is that because of the failure to address this question, that for the first time you saw critical mass become proactive in seizing the initiative. That there was no longer the reliance on whether it was the United States, the Europeans, or others. And so there was this sense everywhere you go that we have to take control of what happens next to us. We can't rely on others, be it the women, the youth, or whatever. And so in that way, the experience of the Arab-Israeli conflict had an influence as kind of as a catalyst in galvanizing people to take to the street and make their own statements to generate, you know, people power.
May I chip in there? Because I actually agree with both what Abdul Karim said on this particular topic and what you said, Robin. Because I think, I mean, identity, not only for Palestinians, but for the broader Arab and maybe Muslim community, is inseparably linked to nationhood. So, I mean, and this is why I never believed that it was improving living conditions, which Nabil and I worked a lot with over many, many years, would resolve the conflict. I mean, it is very important, but it will not resolve the conflict because Palestinian identity is glued to the question of nationhood, and it will not disappear before that nation is there. And I think this is also reflected in the broader Arab world. But I don't think it was a major driving factor for the revolutions and upheaval. So I think actually all of us, and I think I will include Yossi is not here any longer, would agree on that. And that this is crucial, but you have to separate apples from oranges here. Sure, quickly.
My name is
you need a microphone.
I have a loud voice. That's okay. My name is Alia, and I wanted to comment on that. My name is Alia Badini. I'm from Egypt. I wanted to comment on your comment about the Arab-Israeli conflict being a factor. It was a factor in the Egyptian revolution, and it was reflected in the banners that were held in Tahrir Square during the revolution, because of the regime and Mubarak cared more about the safety of Israel more than the Egyptian people, and the soldiers, a lot of soldiers got killed on the borders between Israel and Egypt, and that was one of the reasons people were very upset that they lost their dignity and nobody cared about it. The government didn't, and nobody claimed their rights, and what they cared about the most was the safety of the borders of Israel. And nobody even looked at the soldiers. A lot of soldiers died on the borders. And actually, when in Tahrir squares, they held the banners that said, Saudi took Ben Ali, Israel can take Hosni Mubarak. So, yeah, I just wanted to comment on that.
Thank you very much. I'm sure the panelists will come back to that question. We have now about 15 minutes left, and I will take a few more questions, and then
There is one in the back.
I see maybe the gentleman on the front row. Maybe you could state your name and affiliation, please, sir.
From the IPI. I guess
and the former ambassador of Yemen to the United Nations.
I wanted to comment on what Nabil said. The reason the Arab uprising of 2011 is compared to 1848, 1989 is because uprising, spontaneous, unplanned, without leaders. That is not the case in Latin America. Latin America, there was change, and there was the others look about how things are developing in Latin America. Then the virus spread. But there was no spontaneity in Latin America. I think in the Latin case, we will learn from the transitions, because the transition in Latin America was very important. For transition to succeed, you need a hospitable geography, you need institutions of state to function in order to succeed in that case. And Latin America here is pertinent. But I think the comparison to 1848, 1989 is very relevant because of the nature of the uprising. The second thing I just wanted to comment on this, the Turkish model. You know, in the Arab world, we all want to be like Turkey. Why? Turkey is successful economically, it has a liberal attitude. But they do not think the road, the tumult, and the backward and forward steps that Turkey went through. They want to jump to the end of the road. Well, when Ataturk began, well, it's not even Ataturk, it's the Young Turks. It is the empire that started the reform because they wanted to compete with Europe and so on. And for 70 years, they have been doing this. So I think it's very good, but I don't believe that the Arabs will be able to do what the Turks did, because we are now the majority, the dominant power in the Arab world are Islamists. They're not going to do what Kemal Ataturk did in adopting Jacobean secularism, which is anti-religion. That is not possible. In the case of Yemen, the meddlers, by the way, Yemen invited the Gulf to come. It's the president of Yemen who asked them to come and mediate. And to tell you the truth, without the unity of the international community, including the Gulf countries, Yemen would have descended into a civil war, much more violent than any other country in the world. So in that sense, we are grateful to the meddlers for helping us overcome the problems. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are very proud to have Abdallah in our midst at IPI. He's not only the former permanent representative of Yemen, he's also the former Deputy Foreign Minister of Yemen. You speak with great authority. We will take a few more questions. The gentleman with the hand in the middle there, please.
François Heisburg, Chairman of the IISS in London. Just a couple of points. Forecastability of revolutions. If you're talking about a spontaneous revolution, it is by definition unforecastable, including by the people who want to do a revolution. Lenin had not foreseen the February 1917 revolution. The would-be revolutionaries in France of 1789 had not forecast the 14th of July and the fall of the Bastille. These things happen. What you can do, what a good academic, a good journalist, a good spook, a good diplomat can attempt to do, is to describe a pre-revolutionary situation, which Lenin had done quite well concerning Russia. which the French pre-revolutionaries, if I can call them that, had quite well done in 1789. And similarly, of course, some people concerning the Arab world, just look at the UNDP report of 2005. That described a pre-revolutionary situation if I ever saw one. Second point, when my turn comes later on to speak on the panel, I'll talk about 1848. But just a word about 1989. That is not a good analogy. The revolutions of 1989 in those countries which had been Sovietized by brute force in 1947, 48, 49, Romania, Bulgaria, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Poland, those countries knew where they wanted to go from day one of their revolutions in 1989. They knew they wanted to belong to the Western world. They knew what the direction was going to be from their standpoint. This is something which is entirely lacking in most other revolutionary episodes, like the ones I've just mentioned, or the ones which are currently occurring in the Arab world. So we should be very careful in attempting to extrapolate the work of regional and international institutions in the framework of the 1989 revolutions, and what can and should be done by similar organizations concerning the Arab revolutions.
Thank you. I can see there is a gentleman at the very back on my left-hand side. Please. I will move over to you in a minute.
Sorry. I'm Edward Mortimer, and I would like to support what Francois just said. It's a great pity that Rima Khalaf, who was the main instigator of those Arab Human Development Reports, is not on your panel as was hoped and expected. The problem, I think, about prediction is not the what, but the when. Many of us, I mean, I am much less expert on the Arab world than most people here, but I knew enough about it that I could have said, I don't think this system is sustainable. But if you had said to me, okay, when is it going to come apart? I would have had much more difficulty, because the reasons why it was not sustainable have been apparent for a long time. But somehow it sustained itself through these intelligence and security systems until suddenly people lost their fear and discovered that they could actually challenge these regimes. And predicting when that would happen, it's like when the stock market turns. If you know when it's going to happen, you'll be a rich man. But saying that it will happen is not very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Shall we then move to the right-hand side? I will start with the front row. You've been very patient, gentlemen and lady, I believe.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me start first by thanking our colleagues who have made excellent presentations. Very enlightening, I must say. But I would like to have some comments. I'm not making any questions. First, when I moved to my government, I asked myself, are we learning from history or not? I can assure you we are not. I do recall that back, I think, 12 years ago, the Carnegie Institute in Washington, D.C. made a survey about 100 countries, particularly focusing on those who are going through transition. The result was 5 countries resorted to more dictatorship, about 20 countries established their democracies, and the rest are in gray areas. Now, with the Arab Spring, are we going to go into gray area, or are we going to establish real democratic institutions and democratic governance? Those who can make assumptions, and this is a lesson that I have learned from my professor 40 years ago, it is a mistake to conclude, but it's a good idea to assume. We can make predictions. We can assume what is going to happen in the Arab region. but we cannot make conclusion at this stage because it takes time. What I would like to emphasize, and we have spoken a lot about Islam, and probably 30% to 40% of discussion are talking about Islamic Brotherhood. My conclusion is, and based on the historical experience in the past, that the international community has to change its view as far as Islam. We have to think about Islam in a more positive context. The more we think Islam in terms of negativism, the more you increase the list of extremism. And this is very indicative at this stage. And this is applicable in the Arab region as a whole. We should really change our perception as much as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now take one more intervention. I will remind you that this is the first session of a seminar which goes over 1.5 days, and you will all have the opportunity to come back to questions which are relevant to our discussion now, because the discussion we have now will penetrate every single panel which we will have for the rest of the seminar. You have the floor.
Thank you. I'm very much aware of that. Just 2 points I wanted to raise. I'm Khaled Shamad, Ambassador of Egypt. First point about the prediction. It's not only the presidential candidate Amr Moussa who felt that. No, I understand that. But it is something that was felt in Cairo, in Egypt, quite well, especially during that year, 2010. That was something that was felt so vividly in the streets, the amount of strikes, sit-ins by factory workers, etc., along the Al-Asr Al-Aini street, downtown Cairo. So the signs were there, the works were there, let's say. 1848, 49, 1989, the analogy, I think I go with the opinion that we should be careful about the analogy. We're talking about a different world altogether. The realities on the ground, what characterizes the region now is the human factor. And I think this is the key to what we are seeing and witnessing now in the region. It is not about regional organizations, institutions, but it's more about the human factor. It is the human being that is shaping the future of the region. I want to commend very much your insights and views, Robin, on the works in the region, on the developments in the region. There are lots of issues that are debatable. I'm not going to do that now, but I'll reserve my right for the coming sessions. But one thing for sure, it is a beginning of a process. It's transitional now, as you rightly mentioned. Devising it as we go. And this is part of the nature of transition. There is no blueprint for that. But with lots of hope and thinking ahead, the results, of course, of the elections today and tomorrow in Cairo will be very indicative in that. Irrespective of the result, and irrespective of the inner workings of the political parties and groups, there will be a formula. The important thing is to work for that formula to work internally, but also what we need to discuss is what you mentioned at the beginning, that the states of the Arab Spring, the region, needs the assistance, economic assistance, from partners. Not in terms of meddling as the 14 players or 15 players that you were referring to, but more in the sense of partnership. And I think this is a message I would like to leave you with for now before we go into more details later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now I will give a brief comment myself, and then I will give Abu Karim and Robin the floor for their concluding remarks, and then we will have a coffee break before we go back to the next panel. Just briefly about predictability and institutions. I do not believe that you can give a scientific analysis of conditions which makes you draw the conclusion that a revolution or a revolt or an upheaval will take place. And here I agree with what Edward Mortimer says. You cannot give the precise timing. But I can tell you, I'm a sociologist by training. And after my visit, on the same visit where I met Amr Moussa, I gave a briefing to the Security Council. And I ended that briefing in the Security Council by saying the following. The Middle East is today like a tent resting on two poles, Egypt and Saudi Arabia. That tent is swaying in the wind, and the poles are swaying in the wind. A hurricane is blowing up, and as one of those poles go down, the whole tent will go down. I felt utterly convinced, and I was spurred by Amr Moussa's remarks, looking at the data, looking at the sentiments amongst the people I talked to across the region, that this was going to happen. But I couldn't predict when it was going to happen. So it was, it was a combination of seeing the data and gut feelings. But I felt utterly convinced that it was going to happen. Then on institutions, my point concerning the creation of institutions are very simple. And again, I will exemplify the reasoning. I was sitting with one of the rulers of a Gulf country recently, and he said the following. He said, I am now asked to finance Egypt. And I am very hesitant, because there is now a process of making a constitution there. And if this constitution becomes an institution which springs out of political Islam, Egypt might be 5 years from now an enemy of my country. This is my dilemma. So, and then he said, we have to create or build or rebuild regional institutions, which gives the necessary incentives for moving in the direction of good governance. He didn't use the word democracy, but to move it in that direction. And I believe profoundly that actually the situation is, as I said in my introduction, that for basically all the countries, less for some, more for others, is unpredictable unless there are institutional incentives on a regional basis to produce the motivation for moving in the right direction. Okay, I think I will, Abdul Karim, may I start with you for concluding remarks and responding to the different questions here?
My concluding remark is that change has come. It doesn't seem to be in the right direction today. Everyone has the rise of the Islamists in the region has in mind, because they have not been tested whether they will be democratic or they will turn autocratic, as many would expect, with one election, one vote, one time. This picture is still obscure. However, as old as I am, I have to be optimistic, and I would say the change by itself has come in a milieu that is totally different from what happened in Europe or what happened in 1952 in Egypt, which also led to many changes. The level of education is very high today than it was, whether in the 1848 or in the French Revolution. The public is more aware that it wants change, and that change must be positive and not returning to the situation 19.
Robin?
Very quickly, on the issue of the Arab-Israeli conflict, I think what's striking to me everywhere I've been in the last 4 months is the degree to which no one wants another war. And that even when you talk to the most conservative, most extreme. I went to see a man named Nabil Naim, who recruited 2,000 jihadis. He just got out of 20 years in prison. He grew up and was a very close friend of Ayman al-Zawahiri. And he's, even he doesn't want another war. He talks about wanting rehabilitation from the Egyptian government, that there is a sense that, yes, they want better gas prices for the gas they sell to Israel. Yes, they want more troops on the Sinai, and yes, they want to do more for Hamas. But in terms of walking away from Camp David, I couldn't find anyone who wanted that in Egypt or in any other country, but Egypt most importantly. Secondly, in terms of 1989, I mean, I make the comparison in part because I think that what we often don't take into context is that what's happened in the Arab world is part and parcel, and I'm an historian by training, of a common trend, that historians will look back on this period as being a moment when you find the majority of people on earth accepting a common standard for their role, their say in governance. It may be in different forms, but there is an embrace of a kind of universal set of ideas, implemented, as I said, in different ways. But that, to me, is the commonality of whether it's Latin America or Eastern Europe or what happened in Africa. And finally, when it comes to real democracy, I think three things that we haven't talked about, and I'll pick up one on, is the issue of constitution. We pay so much attention to what's happening on election day, when in fact the reality is, most important thing is what happens in writing constitutions. I covered the Iranian Revolution and the very messy aftermath, and it was the discord among groups that had united against the Shah, and the fact they began fighting with each other that led the clerics, including Ayatollah Khomeini, to come back from Qom and to put an Islamic veneer at the time on that constitution, which of course has given the clerics more of a role over the last 30 years. And created the Islamic Republic, in which Islam is far more important than the Republic. I'm concerned in Egypt about the military, and I would love to believe that the military really will hand over power. I think there'll be a lot of fanfare sometime this summer, signing documents and so forth, but because of their own economic interests in the system, I'm not convinced that the military will back away completely from power. And whether it's the military in Egypt or the militias in Libya, I think that's a problem that we don't pay enough attention to. And finally, the issue that concerns me maybe the most is sectarianism, which plays out so violently in Syria, and is why Syria may be the messiest of all the transition countries we see. And my concern is also that that plays out in even the Iranian nuclear conflict, in which the Saudis may be as interested in standing up to Iran because of the Shiite-Sunni divide as because of Iran's nuclear program. And when we look down the road at what happens next, that to me, because of the tensions, worries me the most.
Thank you very much. There were plenty of opportunities to discuss those issues as well in the rest of the seminar. I wanted to thank you, Robin, you, Abdul Karim, for being so incredibly clear, for being so incredibly candid, in spite of a streaming world audience here, to be so constructive, to be so, I was about to say, colossal. You have been terrific, and I think that goes for all the questions and the other interventions as well. A little break, coffee, and we'll go back to the panels again.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back.
Last year, I had the opportunity to stay at the Geneva Center for Security Policy and to meet Mr. Alan Doss, now Senior Political Advisor at the Kofi Annan Foundation, and formerly he was Special Representative in various missions all over the world. And you had very intense discussions on the role of regional, sub-regional, and international organizations and institutions in dealing with the upheavals and the uprisings in the Arab countries we saw at that time. And the finding of both was you should not underestimate the role of regional and sub-regional institutions and organizations in dealing with topics, with security-related situations like we saw last year in the region. So it was very clear to me when I saw the theme of this session that we have three key questions we should ask our speakers. The first one is, who responded and what did he do according to the situation that we were facing last year, during the last year? The second question would be, what were the key arguments, the key drivers, the key elements, the aims of their engagement in dealing or in not reacting, in not acting in a situation like that? And I would say it is not to underestimate a third question, a third factor, and that is what were the expectations? Expectations mainly from the affected societies. So I'm very pleased to introduce to you three speakers that will answer these questions or follow at least a little bit these questions. And I would like to start with Alia El Badini from Egypt. You have the CVs in the program, so I do not have to go into detail. What I found was very impressive is she is at the El Adel Party, Justice Party, and your motivation and professional interest is wants to improve the lack of political awareness and help implement a new democratic transformation that serves the people. I assume you will reflect on that a little bit more in detail definitely. Afterwards. Secondly, I want to come to Mr. Ghazi Ben Ahmed, Secretary General of the Club de Tunis. He is now Secretary General, but in his previous career he had several posts. As, for example, he was the lead trade expert at the African Development Bank. He was working with the United Nations Agency for Trade and Development. And not to forget, he also worked for almost 10 years in the European Commission in Brussels. I mentioned already when I saw you, I could not believe it because you seem to be so young, so how could it work? And third, I would not say he has to be introduced because he is so well known in all over Europe and abroad. Mr. François Heisbourg, Chairman of the International Institute of Strategic Studies. And he had several positions within the government as an economic advisor, as a political advisor, as an academic. And I'm always very impressed when I meet him because he has the skill to put together pieces of a puzzle and to provide a picture. And that is what we expect also today from you. And that brings me to the first speaker, Mr. Ghazi. When we had the preparation for this session, I sent you an email and asked you to reflect a little bit what was the reaction of the regional organizations on the developments in Tunisia, in Egypt, and all the countries affected. And you promptly answered and said they did nothing except Libya. So may I ask you to elaborate a little bit on that? What is nothing from your perspective?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, let me also thank you for this for the organizers of this event. It's a beautiful room where we are today, and thank you also for giving me this opportunity to be with you today. I feel very honored, also as Secretary General of this new initiative, the Club de Tunis. Before answering your questions, maybe I should give you my personal view on the event that happened and that shook the region not so long time ago. I see the Arab Spring as a big earthquake with epicenter in Tunis and different effects on different countries. This to say that we cannot compare or have a general statement on all the Arab world. Countries are really different. Even in North Africa, neighboring countries are not comparable one to the other. And generally, I prefer to distinguish between North Africa and the Middle East for obvious reasons. So I used to work in Europe before the Arab Spring, and then I went to Tunisia joining the African Development Bank 5 years ago. And I could tell already by the time that something was in the air. I couldn't say that something will happen any day or with some predictability, as we said before, but you could feel that it was the end of an era, that something was brewing. And then suddenly it happened with the consequences that we now know, and it took everybody by surprise. But what is interesting, I would say, more than who was able to predict it, I would say more interesting was the speed of reaction of international bodies, of foreign governments. And just to give you an example, we had I think a couple of weeks after the revolution in Tunisia, we had the visit of Senator Lieberman and Senator McCain, which in fact was very telling as a reaction. So we felt that there are people, government caring. The European Union also, we start to see a défilé of European commissioners, whereas in the former years, almost nobody came to visit to Tunisia. It was, we were like put aside. So interestingly, the EU and the US were really prompt to react, to try to figure out how to solve the situation, how to maybe to bring help. And we should come back to that point, how we should see the role of both the EU and the US, which I personally see as two main partners for Tunisia and also for North Africa. As far as the Arab League, the African Union are concerned, their response, to say frankly, we see them more as doing in parallel as a second order bodies, because we do not see direct impact Although I would say that the Arab Maghreb Union body should be, in the future, see its role maybe boosted, and it is one of the 8 regional organizations recognized by the African Union, and it should play a more meaningful role in the future. So this is as far as the reaction of regional institution is concerned. I don't know about how long I have. I can tell you more about the situation, maybe the challenges.
I would say, let us stay here as a first statement. There was no strong role for regional organizations, but you could see an enhanced engagement in the future. Could you just comment for the future engagement, what could be their future role in 2 minutes?
Well, I mentioned the Arab Maghreb Union as an important body because I do believe that if North African countries want to accelerate growth, create jobs, they need to go for regional integration. I do believe that South-South regional integration is very important. Also to be able to take advantage of what the EU is offering today in accessing its market and maybe the US tomorrow. So the Arab Maghreb Union should play a leading role to bring these countries together. I think that the 5 countries of the North Africa, including Mauritania, should really have they enhance their relationship and get a regional integration. So this one role certainly for the Arab Maghreb Union.
Thank you so much as a first step. Mr. Hesburg, before asking you for your short introduction, may I tell you what you can see here on the screen? We provided one chart that is an assessment from our side at the Institute at the National Defense Academy. What was the engagement of the regional and international organization in dealing with the different countries? So I wanted to surprise you to jump in and give your reflection. What do you see mainly from the key players, United Nations organizations, from the NATO, EU maybe? What was your impression and your assessment?
First of all, I see that there's one organization you do not mention, which is the Union du Maghreb Arabe, which has just been referred to, about which I have a few doubts, since the land border between Morocco and Algeria is one of the very few land borders like that between North and South Korea, which is completely closed to traffic of people and goods. To see a practical role for the Union du Maghreb Arabe, I would love to see it, but I don't see it happening. But on the ones you mentioned, first basic response, then drivers, as you suggested. Basic response, right side of history, as was mentioned by the ambassador from Turkey. We were all initially wrong-footed. The French foreign minister at the time had some imprudent words about helping the Ben Ali regime to use force to suppress the population. The British Prime Minister was on his way to an arms exhibition in Dubai, and the Americans were sending Ambassador Wiesner to Cairo in order to see whether the whole thing couldn't be finessed one way or the other. But within the space of a few weeks, the West in general had decided that being on the right side of history was helping and promoting the Arab uprisings. 2 other countries made it entirely different determination, Russia and China. Well, we will see in the fullness of time who was on the right side or the wrong side of history. I have no doubts in moral terms what should be the right side of history. But the fact is that in Moscow and Beijing, the answer is not the same. And we see it in the Security Council. Drivers. Drivers, let me speak here for a moment from a European standpoint. Sense of opportunity, but a sense of opportunity which is often overridden by the sense of risk. And I'll try to explain why this is. On the opportunity side, yes, there is the glow from the 1989 revolutions, however wrong that analogy may be. And we saw very early on in the European Commission ideas in terms of reaching out towards the countries of the uprisings, which were very similar to those which were applied in 1989. I would add that this was a real progress in comparison to the European Union's prior attitude, which was to try to work in an undifferentiated manner with all of the regimes of the Mediterranean area, whether it be in the framework of Barcelona or the framework of the Union pour la Méditerranée. And for entirely predictable reasons, that approach did not work. But the selective approach, one in which we help the countries which are rising up, I think was a wise one, but it also may not be, it will probably not work the way it did in Central and Eastern Europe post-1989. On the risk side, and this we saw very strongly in Italy, in France, the fear of immigration, that regime change would lead to mass immigration. And we saw this paradigm operating notably under Berlusconi in the weeks which followed the overthrow of Ben Ali. But also less, how to put it, less populistic fears, which are more of a strategic nature. And some of these elements were mentioned in the earlier discussion. The fear of what may happen in the Persian Gulf, or in the Arab Gulf, or in the Arab-Persian Gulf, or in the Bay of Basra, as they call it sometimes in Turkey. The Egyptian pole is not in the place where it was before, and the Saudi pole is wavering in the wind. And of course, the Sunni-Shia divide, the Arab-Persian divide against the backdrop of a nuclear program. So the sense of opportunity, the sense that we need, particularly vis-à-vis the Maghreb, and here I would agree with this differentiation, that yes, we have to help uprisings, but we are afraid of what may come. And here I'll finish on the revolutionary analogy. The revolutionary analogies which inform European attitudes on these sorts of events are not mainly 1989. That was the Commission, essentially. They are 1848 and 1789. 1789, you all have heard the, well, I think that's actually an apocryphal discussion, but it's still quite an interesting one, between André Malraux and Chou En-lai in the 70s. And André Malraux is supposed to have asked Chou En-lai, what do you think about the outcome of the French Revolution? And Chou En-lai is supposed to have answered, too early to tell. Yes, it takes time for these processes to work themselves through the international and domestic systems. And here the 1848 analogy is particularly strong. 1848, it was called, when it happened, the springtime of the peoples. This is not an ex post facto designation. 1848, in order to understand what happened, and in order to see how this may inform the manner in which we think here in Europe about the Arab revolutions, simply make 4 very quick points. First, think 25 years. It's by the early 1870s that we knew what the effects of 1848 were. United Germany, United Italy, Republican France, Austria and Hungary divided. Pretty big, strategically. Secondly, think dialectics. No, autocracy did not win in 1848. What happened was that from the struggle between non-participative autocracy and the forces of liberalism, what came out of that was the synthesis of populist chauvinism, nationalism, democratic nationalism. Germany was not a dictatorship in 1914. Most European countries were democracies in 1914. They were nationalistic democracies in most instances. So the notion that what you're going to get from a transformation like that which is taking place in the Arab world is that it is probably not going to be the old regimes coming back. It is probably not the sort of regimes which the neocons in Washington thought were going to take over in the Arab world, because the neocons in Washington actually did see the Arab revolutions coming. Which is not entirely reassuring, if I can put it in a different manner. But it's probably something else which will emerge over time, as it did between 1848 and the early 1870s in most European countries. And thirdly, think of possible conflictual outcomes. Europe post-1848 was not transformed into a space of peace and cooperation and stability. It was transformed into something rather different, which ended up with the First World War. Now, I'm not making a forecast about what is going to come out of the revolutions in the Arab world, and we have every reason to want to emphasize the opportunity. But in understanding the way the Europeans approach these sorts of events, that is what you have to have in mind. There's always this sense of risk, which may, in some instances, cloud the judgment of the Europeans and make them forget the need to foster opportunity.
Thank you so much. As a first introduction, may I come now to Aliyah? I think it was not in your thoughts to think about 25 years perspective or thinking of possible conflictual outcomes when the revolution started in Egypt. So what is your impression? What is your perspective on that? What is your personal experience?
All right. First of all, good afternoon, and I would like to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to be part of this and share my thoughts and experiences with you. Firstly, I'd like to say it's great to meet such wonderful people with intellect and experienced diplomats, ambassadors, and all that. But no wonder nobody predicted the revolution, because you did not communicate with other people like me who are even like, who will give you an insight more like me. That's first of all. Second, I'm not talking on behalf of all the youth in Egypt. I'm giving you one perspective, one point of view that you will find other point of views that might share the same one or even different with me if you meet other people like me from Egypt. I'd like to stick to my notes because I tend to talk a lot and I could take all day. So I'd like to take you quickly through the situation in Egypt right now to give you an understanding of other than what you hear from the media. So after Mubarak stepping down and the SCAF taking over and promising to hand in power in 6 months after electing a new parliament, a lot has happened and the transitional period took longer than we expected. And the intentions of all involved parties were revealed. And I think it was for the best interest of the people to know the intentions of SCAF, the remainder of the old regime, the Muslim Brotherhood, and the political parties on the scene. Most of the people involved in politics right now are new to it. People like me and people who did not have an opinion, a political opinion before. Some might had a positional opinion, but some didn't, except for the Muslim Brotherhood and few others, and therefore didn't expect how long it takes to transform the country from a 60 years dictatorship to a democratic system. And because most of the generations never had a voice before and have their own agendas and think they know what's best for the country and the people, they don't care to listen to their needs, and that's why there has been a lot of confusion. We elected a parliament that we thought is going to be the voice of the people and the voice of the revolution, but it was kind of disappointing. The upside was we voted for the first time in our lives, and we now know how to evaluate and re-elect new representatives that will be the voice of the people in the future. We are electing a president for the first time, as we all said today, and the fact that we don't know who it will be in advance is an achievement and an accomplishment in itself towards the very tiny steps to democracy. And candidates are actually competing to gain people's approval instead of taking them for granted like before. We are very optimistic. I'm not pessimistic at all, that after the first round of the parliamentary and presidential elections, and with some help from people like myself and many others to build political and social awareness, the next time we will be taking the first steps towards true democracy. We will know who to elect for real. We will actually look at the programs they're offering and evaluate the results later. As for the reaction from the international community before the revolution, I have to say it was extremely disappointing to the people and didn't leave good credit at all. The West preferred stability over democracy because it was in their best interest, and human rights violation and extreme living conditions that left millions homeless and unemployed and illiterate was not an issue. And I'm hoping that this will change in the future, and it changed a little bit after the revolution. And the proof is I'm here right now. People are actually trying to reach out to the youth in Egypt to reflect on what's happening. And as for Africa and the Arab world, it's the other way around. They did not play a very important role in Egypt before, because it was Egypt's role to play in Africa and the Arab world, and it was completely overlooked and ignored. The need to cooperate due to the corruption and the greed of the old regime. And the foreign affairs policies with these countries need to be reevaluated. The reaction after the revolution was very neutral and still disappointing, because the international community didn't think of changing their strategy because people objected and went to the streets to protest, but they waited till they were sure that Mubarak was history, and the people were not backing down. After SCAF took power, the international community continued communication with them and opened new channel of communication with the ones who were most likely to be in power, and that was the Muslim Brotherhood, and started approaching some of the youth who were part of the revolution and who will most likely be in power in the next few years. But the criteria of dealing with SCAF or whoever will be in power, unfortunately, is not as it seems. Based on the protection of human rights, and the proof is continuing dealing with SCAF heavily after the incredible violation of human rights several times the past year. And they only cut communication after the NGO crisis that happened a few months ago, which was because it was not in their best interest as well. What I'm hoping for in the future is a mutual beneficial relationship between Egypt and the international community, because we are aiming to be in a powerful and strong position to limit conditionalities that are being applied to get foreign aid, and maybe afford cutting foreign aid once and for all in the future, in the not the near future, but maybe in the next 20 years. We are looking for, as I said, mutual beneficial relationship where it's a win-win situation instead of us taking foreign aid and being told what to do. We will not get rid of the military ruling in 1 or 2 years. It will take us a few years to completely define the role in the country away from politics. They will stay in politics for a while. We know that for sure. They've been in it for 60 years, and they will stay in it for a while until we can actually work towards putting them back to their barracks. And we also need the help of the international community to do so by expanding communication heavily to the multi-civilian powers, not just the SCAF or the military. And actually, I wanted to talk about why action was taken in some countries and not others, like Libya and Syria, for instance. Libya, I believe it was the geographical location of the country that made it easy for intervention. Syria is on the contrary. There will be a lot of death for the innocent civilians, and also because of the Israeli presence in the Golan Hills. It makes it very difficult for foreign intervention there. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we can discuss this more with open discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. May I ask the two other speakers to reflect on Syria, because we have to find also an answer for the question, why do institutions engage and why do they not, or why the behavior differs totally from Libya to Syria, for example. Just a short remark on that. Your personal reflection.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. First, I essentially agree with what you just said about Libya. We intervened in Libya because we could, because it was comparatively easy. It was not of great strategic importance to most of the neighbors. It was militarily doable, and it was done. And we had a UN Security Council resolution, which could be in the framework of which one could work, even if the edges of the envelope were pushed this way or that. These conditions do not prevail in Syria. Syria is strategically enormously important to all of its neighbors. It is militarily, of course, a lot more difficult. And there is no international legitimacy to an intervention. But things may change. Why? Why am I saying that? When the Syrian revolution began, for the first year or so of the revolution, we had in the Security Council an alignment, a perfect alignment, against intervention, against coercive measures of any sort, not speaking simply military or all of the others, but between Russia, China, and the other BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa refused to adopt the Western resolutions which were presented last year. Then eventually, Brazil, India dropped out, and Russia and China alone remained in their complete opposition, twice a double veto. Now I wonder whether China is not dropping out of that configuration also, for reasons which are related to the Gulf. China wants to have guaranteed access to oil from the Gulf. The Sunni states of the Gulf, and notably Saudi Arabia, have made it very clear to China that they were going to have a difficult time if China did not respect the rights of the Sunni people, their brethren in Syria. And the Chinese, I think, have gotten the message. And if there were a new coercive resolution in the Security Council, Russia may actually find itself entirely isolated. Whether Russia would be ready to be entirely isolated, I do not know. So if I look 6 months ahead, I would personally not be surprised if we actually did enter into a set of progressively more coercive resolutions in the political and economic spheres to begin with, but eventually working one's way down the road towards a more forceful action. The failure of the Annan plan, because it is a failure despite the best efforts of Kofi Annan, has, I think, laid also the ground for that kind of evolution. So I agree with you. What you say explains why intervention or coercive measures generally have not happened in Syria. But I would be less, I would not forecast a simple continuation of the abstention of outside intervention that we have seen since the revolution in Syria began in March of last year.
Mr. Ghazi, please.
Well, personally, I think that, speaking from Tunisian point of view, I think that the intervention in Libya was very positive and welcome, at least, well, for the Libyan themselves, first of all, but also for Tunisia also. It kind of saved our revolution, because I do not imagine a successful Tunisia post-revolution, Tunisia with Gaddafi still in force, in position, neighbor, you know, there was a lot of interaction between Libya and Tunisia. With a serious concern now is the lot of guns widespread in Libya, and the difficulty for the Tunisian army to control its border. So this is a big issue of concern for us in Tunisia, and here there is a need for enhanced cooperation between NATO or European US army with Tunisian army to control the border and to give equipment, necessary equipment to help Tunisian army control the border. Guns and widespread guns is a serious issue as far as Tunisia's stability and security is concerned.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, I saw already the first hand coming up, so may I ask you to come in? Minister Fasslabend, I saw you first.
Yeah, if you want to look for responses, it's always good to have about the same analysis, and I think we are coming nearer and nearer. My proposal is to look at the Arab Revolution and the Arab Spring also as a phenomenon, as the end of the post-colonial period. This means that stability and independence of the countries is not everything anymore, but people on the street are asking their leaders for good governance, for personal freedom and dignity, and for jobs. And what I see is that this also brings a little bit similar development with the role model of Turkey. In Turkey, you had the end of the post-imperial period, just a few years earlier than the end of the post-colonial period in the Arab space. And what they developed is a system that comes out of similar questions that are posed in the Arab space. You could hear all over the Arab space this word of Islam is the solution, Islam will bring the illusion. If you look to Turkey, Erdogan managed to bring by an originally Islamic movement, democracy and economic success. And he overcame the military rule and brought more personal freedom to the people. And insofar, I see this parallelism of the development of Turkey on the one hand and of the Arab space on the other hand. And what I think is important is to go back to those fundamental questions that come from the street. If we want to help, we should try to assist in good governance, in strengthening personal freedom, and in backing economic development. That's what I see, and this is the overall answer for all the institutions from outside, even if they are not very specific, and you have to go furthermore in details.
Thank you so much. I would say it could be a final question to all of the speakers, how you could see the future role of institutions in supporting and bringing in what was mentioned here in detail already. Please.
Let me also thank the colleagues who made excellent presentations in relation to the theme and the discussion. And my apology because I spoke earlier without introducing myself. I am Mohammed Abdelaziz, I'm the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs in Libya. I think talking about the multilateral regional engagement, it's key to the success of the Arab Spring. Such engagement, which proved the case in Libya, for example, had it been the case that NATO did not intervene in Libya, I can assure you that those who revolted against Gaddafi's regime would have finished it up. And those who have not stood against the regime will become servants for the Gaddafi family. I come from the country that understands the specificity, the tribalism, and the social context of the Libyan psychology. And therefore, while we are criticized for having NATO intervene, it seems to me that without that intervention, Libya would have been very chaotic. And it would have strengthened the dictatorship in Libya more than having reform. This is comment number one. The key question is, when we talk about the multilateral regional engagement, it's not that engagement that happened during the uprising. What is more important is to sustain that engagement. Sustain it in terms of promoting the security in those regions. At the same time, as my colleague mentioned, it should be combined, the sense of stability and security should be combined with the development assistance factor. Without that, it becomes very difficult. And therefore, what we aim at, regardless of the differences between the revolution in Libya and Egypt and Tunisia, we should also bear in mind there is a big difference. Because in Tunisia, institutions and ministers in terms of infrastructure remained intact. In Egypt, the same thing remained intact. In Libya, there was a war. Practically, we have to restart everything, not, I would say, from scratch, but we have to do that. Let me, if I may, add about the viability of the support of the regional organizations. It's thanks to the Gulf Cooperation Council that presented a proposal to the League of Arab States to reach, that the case of Libya reached the Security Council. Without that, we would have not been able to have the multilateral engagement as far as the role of security cooperation is concerned. But at the same time, while the role of the African Union was somehow the mediator, and we did appreciate that, but at that time, the public feeling that they felt that the African Union should do more in terms of siding the revolution than siding the regime. But still, as a regional organization, trying to play the neutral role by mediating between. For the European Commission or the European Union, I would say we are extremely grateful because from the beginning, the European Union presented exactly three main issues that they are able to support. In the field of governance, democratic institutions, in terms of role of the media, and in terms of civil society organization, and above all, as my dear friend Ghazi from Tunisia spoke of the dimension of the border security. It's extremely important that the European Union at the moment has already completed a so-called border assessment from a security point of view. And we're hoping, as Ghazi suggested, that would like to see if this could be complemented by capacity building and technological equipments that could really help us control our borders. Thank you.
The lady in the third row, please. I think it was a remark, it was not a question. You can reflect on it later. Yeah. Please. We take three questions.
I'm Francesca Fritz-Bogoda from UNHCR, and it strikes me quite a bit the exclusive focus on which organization, which institutional engagement we are focusing here. I mean, it's clearly a political and military intervention, which makes sense, but the question is also what's about the humanitarian intervention? And, well, as you probably know, UNHCR has been engaged closely and intensively engaged since the very beginning. And a couple of keywords would be border management, which was also mentioned right now, mixed migration movements, and some 1,500 perished away people who tried to cross the sea and to come to Europe looking for protection and safety. Now, for me, the question would be, and I know I would speak out of the soul of many of my colleagues, and hopefully some of you as well, is like we know that the impact of uprisings and violent repression nearly always and everywhere leads to forced displacement, often in a very massive and numerically significant manner. But the dimension of displacement, both from a security point of view, which is probably more the interest here, but also from a humanitarian and human rights point of view, of course, it's our experience that this dimension is very often very painfully neglected, both in the political interventions as well as in the transition support. So when I read here in the concept note, the uprisings have dramatically changed the political landscape, Well, we would probably also argue that not just the political, also the demographic one, because there have been hundreds of thousands of forcibly displaced men and women who have to look either within their own country or crossing an international border for new perspectives. And we know from 60 years experience that these people become normally actors of change. They have or can have, in a good scenario, a very powerful and positive and constructive role in transition processes, but with the same token, they can have a very destabilizing impact as well. So my question a bit resulting from this would be, I wonder how all of you, the political and the military actors, consider this dimension, not only from a security point of view, also from a humanitarian and human rights and individual dignity point of view, and what proposals you could maybe make, how to factor in the people of our concern, in this case UNHCR, but we're working evidently very strongly with partners, into your deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We take a third one from the gentleman here.
Thank you, Chair, and I fully appreciate the level and the scope of the discussion, I think, to this morning and now. I am from the Diplomatic Academy, and I'm the youngest student there. But originally I came from the African Union, but I'm not sent by the African Union. I'm on my own, but I worked there for about 7 years, and I was following up what happened in North Africa right from the beginning, including how the African Union responded to the situation. But before I go there, I just want to make a couple of remarks. One, I don't see the African Union on that chart, and I'm sure it is not a deliberate omission. Whatever the position it takes, I think it has been playing some roles, and I think...
It's only food for thought.
Okay.
It's not decisive.
So that gave me this thought, actually. Thank you very much. Second, I think this morning and now we are discussing about the effect of revolution. I think it's only the lucky revolutionaries that survive revolutions and reap the benefits. The revolution eats its own children, as we used to say 17 years ago, 20 years ago in Ethiopia, where we had the revolution against the Emperor Haile Selassie in 1974. We used to say revolution eats its own children, and I think many revolutions eat their children. So it's only the luckiest generations that come with the benefits associated with them. So there would be difficulties when there are revolutions, and in fact I think revolutions are not for revolutionaries but for succeeding generations. I think that's very important. So the Egyptians, the Tunisians should recognize the difficulty that they will have now and in the coming 10 years, 20 years. But the next generations will really benefit from our sacrifices. That's one point I want to make. With regard to the responses, regional and international responses to the Arab Springs in general, and to some of the springs in particular, especially to Libya, I think there are two dimensions. The first dimension, or the first response, which didn't happen, was, I think, in Tunisia, in Egypt, which took the entire world by surprise. I think, and in fact, this was what Alain Juppé, the foreign minister, spoke. We were caught by surprise. And I think the African Union Commission chairperson, Dr. Jumping, also repeated that. The Arab Springs caught us by surprise. So people were not prepared. The regions were not prepared. The international community was not prepared to respond, either positively or negatively, or if they have responded, only just to make sure that the changes do not produce unnecessary results. So you would have seen the difficult dilemma everywhere, in every headquarters, in every capital. So I think the African Union hadn't taken any positive or negative step right from the beginning, especially in the two countries that I mentioned, because of the uncertainty. I think the unpredictability of the changes made the responses either non-existent or ambiguous. So that's what. But I think the Libyan case gives us a very interesting scenario. The African Union, in the beginning, I'm making a study on how the Pan-African Parliament responded to the Libyan situation. In the beginning, both the African Union, especially the Security Council, were very vehement, strong against Gaddafi bombing his own or killing his own people. And then that continued, I think, by every institution, the Commission, the Pan-African Parliament, and they actually declared or issued resolutions and declarations condemning the indiscriminate attack on civilians. I think the international scenario, the international context changed the responses of the African Union. The African Union, right in the beginning, tried to actually develop a homegrown solution to the problem. But I think in the process it forgot that the problem was regional and international and very complex, not only an African problem, so an African solution could not actually address the entire issue. But I think in the process, the African Union tried to respond to resolve the conflict to a certain extent peacefully, and to a greater extent when they realized, however, that when the situation changed and when the NATO intervention became very powerful, they started to think in terms of, one, I think the violation of not national sovereignty, but regional sovereignty. I think there is this concept that's emerging now, regional sovereignty. Second, I think they were afraid from what happened in the Arab Spring, in the Gulf. Okay.
Thank you for strengthening the Arab Union. I would say the speakers will reflect on your assessment on the African Union. But I would say we come back to the panel now, give some answers from here, and to have time for a second.
Thank you very much. I think I was a bit long, but let me make one last point. I think the fear of the consequences were also one of the reasons for the different responses in the region. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Who wants to start? Mr. Kasi.
Thank you. I would say for me, a revolution in Tunisia started on the ground of unemployment, regional disparities, and the contrast between increasing poverty for the mass and increasing wealth for a few privileged families. So having that in mind, the revolution in Tunisia was not on the place and the role of Islam in society. It was not on the Middle East peace process. It was really on freedom, economic, jobs, and let's call it it is summarized under dignity. So solutions, in my sense, should be seen at least three dimensions. National, I would say even regional, within the regions in Tunisia. Each region should be able, and I'm talking about remote and poor regions in Tunisia. I'm not talking about those who were favored for tourism or for industry, but I'm talking about rural, poor, and with poor infrastructure and rural regions. There should be what we call participatory democracy and involve this region and local actors in the decision making, and also give them the freedom to decide for their future and help them to develop. This is what Le Club de Tunis is doing, and in that we were advised by former President of Brazil, Lula, who said, he said that you should do like I did in Brazil, focus on one region, Nordeste, and start doing your business and try to have a critical mass of projects in one region, which will then have a positive impact, create a dynamism, and have spillover effects on the other regions in Tunisia. This is what we are doing now, try to inject hope in this region, in Tunisia, to make people believe again that they can do it. And it's very important. It's a critical moment. And in that, we are already working with US organizations, with European. And it's important because it's not about a huge amount of money. It's sometimes technical assistance, niches, and well-targeted programs. And this is very important because once you create some activities, some successful projects, you'll see there will be a new dynamism that have a very positive impact. So this is at the, let's say, national, regional, and local dimension. Then, interestingly, there's the role of what I said before, the region as I see it, North Africa. Separately from the Middle East, again, it is important because I consider that we should help North African region consolidate its democracy, boost its economic growth, create jobs, and then maybe create the bridge with the rest of the Middle East, and one day, hopefully, also with Israel, to have a zone of shared prosperity, and like we all hope here, I hope. So at the regional level, regional integration is very important. And despite the fact that there is today an antagonism between Algeria and Morocco, but also there was an antagonism, to say the least, between Germany and France. But we know that today they are the engine of growth of the EU, and so if it was possible for them, it could be possible also for Algeria and Morocco to go over that. We can see already a strong relationship between Tunisia and Libya, between Tunisia and Algeria, and that should be strengthened in my sense, and that could only be de facto through the private sector, through business, which will create the incentives also for politics to follow and to move forward towards. It is a question of generation, and I'm hopeful that once the current leaders are gone, young generation will see the interest to get closer and to work together. There is no other solution. Our markets are small, and we need to have an integrated market to be more attractive for EU and US investors. This could be also helped, of course, by the EU, which is a major trading partner for the region and has a lot of how can I say it, a lot of influence on the region, and a lot of things could be done in partnership with the EU, but again, this time we need from the EU a clear strategy. We have the impression that there is no strategy today, and this is one of also of my main message. The EU, of course, is busy with its own problems, with the Eurozone, with the Greek tragedy. I understand that, but in the same moment, the EU as a powerful actor internationally cannot ignore or cannot do minimum service for its neighboring countries. So there is a need for a very strong message and very strong strategy, which should be built with its southern partners and also take into account the private sector. Again, the private sector should be at the center of every initiative that must be built between the two shores of the Mediterranean. And there is already a framework which should be reactivated. It's the 5+5 dialogue between the 5 Southern European countries and the 5 Northern African countries. This is an excellent start. Also, pragmatic, one solution could be the revival of the Euro-Mediterranean Development Bank. This was an initiative put forward by Italian at the time and could replace the Union for the Mediterranean, which had some problems in moving forward. The Euro-Mediterranean Development Bank could see also the involvement of GCC countries and also of Turkey, of course, in order to create a good framework for helping North African countries. Then I will touch upon US. There are a lot of expectations for US involvement in Tunisia, and I would say also in North Africa, through mainly economically, helping SMEs, helping acceding the market, helping having a, we are waiting also, we look forward to have a US Tunisia FTA, free trade agreement, which will lock in our reforms and give us stronger incentives to reform the market and to help also the private sector. This is briefly what I wanted to say.
Could you give a brief answer to the question of displacement and demographic change in that context? Is it the case in Tunisia? Is it perceived as a problem, as a political problem?
It was the case, but it was solved. But we had initially around 15,000 Tunisians which fled the country and went to Europe, and they made there was a big fuss about it. Whereas in the same times we were hosting 300,000 Libyans in Tunisia. And really, I think, I have a mixed feeling about this, but I'm proud of what Tunisians have done for their brothers in Libya. There was a really spontaneous movement of generosity, but it was really without any hidden agenda. It was really spontaneously. Families hosted Libyan families in Tunisia, and this was a confirmation about the strength and the strong link between Tunisia and Libya. That's why I do believe that the ground is favorable for regional integration in North Africa, and we should put all the effort to concretize it. And this could be done with a variable geometry, starting with Tunisia, Libya, and Algeria, and then tomorrow maybe Morocco.
Thank you. Are you the next generation, Aliyah?
Well, first of all, at the last panel, there was a question, where did the youth go? And actually, that could be answered under this question, next generation. Well, after the revolution, we had some very high hopes that everything will go fast, everything will go quickly, democracy can be achieved in one day, and all that, and we were mistaken because we had no idea that it's a very complicated and long process. And because we realized that we stepped down, and I know a lot of people that are actually decided to work on the ground, to do some awareness campaigns, to build for the next 5 to 10 years. Because, well, according to the Constitution anyways, the 1971 Constitution, no one under the age of 25 can run for parliament, and no one under the age of 40 can run for president. So that eliminated like half of the revolutionaries from the picture. And until we amend the Constitution and amend those laws and rules, we have to work on the ground. Most of a very high percentage of the Egyptian population were not politically active and have no clue what the political scene is all about in Egypt. And this has to be fixed, because the people are very much, we have to use the situation right now that people want to get involved in politics, and actually fuel it by awareness campaigns in political, socially, and also women participation in the revolution was very high, and their participation in the parliament was extraordinary. People were very surprised about the amount of women going to the streets and voting, and it gave us a very clear sign that women want to be involved in politics, and they want to be involved in the government, and we have to increase their participation in the parliament, especially after they canceled the quota for women. We used to have 64 seats in the parliament, and now they canceled it, and we only have 11 women, which is 1.9% of the entire number. Whereas Afghanistan, for instance, is 24.7%, the participation of women in the parliament. And we have to consider a lot of things. So I know a lot of movements that are working on the ground right now. They backed off from the political scene to work on for the next 5 to 10 years. So I'm expecting next round to involve a lot of views that were participating in the revolution and maybe even not participating at all. But it needs a lot of work and it won't happen immediately.
Thank you.
Yes, very quickly, we've covered already a lot of ground. First of all, I agree with Minister Fasselab about the end of the post-colonial period. And this means that outside powers like those of Europe and others really have to work at one remove from the region itself. It is absolutely correct to have stated, as was said earlier on, that without the GCC and without the Arab League, we would not have had the Security Council resolution concerning Libya, and NATO as an organization would not and should not have gone into the war against Gaddafi. I mean, that I think actually set a very nice set of rules, well, nice, a very clear set of rules as to the manner in which we as outsiders may or may not operate in the region. I say it's not necessarily nice because, of course, in the case of Syria, this does tie at least one of our hands behind our backs. Second point, about humanitarian dimension. The one which really scares me these days, and it's the one big negative from the fall of Gaddafi. I was in favor of the war, of the NATO war against Gaddafi. I supported it, and I consider, as others have done here, that this has been a good move for the Libyan people and a good move for the neighboring Arab states, notably Tunisia. However, there is a very significant drawback, and that is the massive destabilization in sub-Saharan Africa, in the Sahel. What is currently going on in Niger, and more significantly in terms of the numbers and the violence in Mali, calls for rapid, major, joint action between the European Union and the African Union for both security and humanitarian reasons. There are a lot of displaced people out there. There are a lot of refugees out there. Are we doing what we should? We are not. We have a great toolbox in the Lisbon Treaty for an integrated approach with the economic, humanitarian, political, military dimensions of an operation which would support the will of the Arab Union, of the African Union. Are we doing anything serious? Here we are not doing anything serious, and if this continues the way it is, we may well end up in sub-Saharan Africa and the Sahel with the functional equivalent of what Afghanistan became in the mid-90s not only for its neighbors, but also for those who may live actually quite far away. And here the passivity of Europe as union is totally unconscionable on all grounds. Third point, having economic integration in North Africa without Morocco and Algeria being in it together is like saying having a common market in Europe with Germany and France not being in the same market. When I say that, I'm not resolving the problem. I'm simply describing it. And unfortunately, I really don't know what it would take in terms of domestic pressure or in terms of international pressure to get that border opened. It's more closed than the wall in the West Bank. It's more closed than Rafah. The only border which is as closed as that is the one between North and South Korea. Even the one between India and Pakistan is more open. And these are two big economies, two big societies, more than 30 million people each. And they are not trading with each other. It's just amazing.
They are.
Well, they
via,
are
via third countries.
And through contraband, massive contraband, because the border is open to massive clandestine black economic activities of exactly the sort which do not promote development. So if we want to be serious about economic integration in that part of the world, we should start thinking also very hard between ourselves, maybe in the framework of 5+5 or whatever, as what it would take to get that border open, because everything else is actually pretty trivial in comparison to that prize.
Ladies and gentlemen.
I wanted to just say something about, because I heard a lot today about we're not very certain about what's going to happen after the presidential elections. We're afraid about the future of Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood, the Islamists, all that. But wasn't the main demand for Europe and the United States is democracy? Like, that's what the people want. I think the support should come without thinking, because the support is for democracy, and that's what the people want in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Libya, in Syria. They want democracy. Whatever democracy will bring, even if Europe or the United States did not like what democracy will bring, the support for democracy should be for the idea of democracy, because these are two of the most democratic nations that are in the world right now. And it surprises me how everyone's delaying the support until they see afterwards what democracy will bring. Because if democracy brings something that someone wouldn't like, then they'll just back off, you know what I mean? They won't support democracy anymore. And it's just, I just wanted to comment on that.
I would like to comment on that too, but time is running out. So I have two final questions. Please, no longer statements, final questions and final answers from the podium here. Lady, please.
I just want to support.
Please wait for the micro.
I just want to support what young lady, young representative from Egypt was saying. We have to have confidence to the collective wisdom and conscience of the people and respect whatever comes out of the polls. And once we agree on that, I think there's nothing to be afraid of. This is the will of the people. If this is what democracy counts, we have to respect that. And we cannot, we have to also have confidence in the people per se. This is what I want to say, and I do agree with you in that respect.
Thank you so much. Mr. Ambassador, please.
Well, I join myself to what Aisha has said in that regard. But actually, the point I wanted to make is something else. It's about the objective of the engagement. I'm having a problem with this chart since the beginning, for one thing. This seems to be the military engagement during the fact, or leading to the conclusion of the fact. But that is not the engagement that I think we are seeking in the Arab world. The engagement that we are seeking is the partnership after the revolution. And that is precisely what Alia was mentioning now. It's the issue of support, be it economic, humanitarian, and I thank you for raising the issue of the displaced people. It's not only about military intervention. And I think, you know, it's very telling that under Tunisia and Egypt, it's blank in there.
It was the past.
That's true. That's a fact. But that is telling. I think what we need to determine now, what we need to think about, is the objective of the engagement. That is the question that needs to be answered, because answering this question will also determine the possibilities of engagement after the conclusion of the political processes in the respective countries. That will determine the interaction or the possibilities of interaction and the level of interaction of the supposedly international actors, be it states, organizations, etc., organizations in the sense of the EU or otherwise, with the political structure that emanates from that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for raising the last question, because that is what we intended to do in the final round. What is, you said engagement. What is the engagement we are seeking, what we are looking for, what is needed in the foreseeable future? And I would address it to the different institutions we see and that are in place. And I would hand over the questions to the speakers here on the panel. Please, what do you see as the most important need in the region? You had 3 levels in the region and maybe also for Tunisia. And what do you think, who can be or should play an important role in fulfilling it?
Well, I will speak for Tunisia, and I would say that in my sense, Tunisia is the best chance for success in this long journey that has shaken the whole region. And because of many aspects, criteria, Tunisia is a small country, strong institutions, women are very strong and empowered, youth are really looking for higher living of standards. We do not have tribes. We are a homogeneous country, open to the West. So there are several factors which keep me optimist and confident about the rest of the task, the rest of the journey. What is needed is to consolidate what we have already done, is really economic growth. We will not be able to consolidate the democracy and to consolidate what we have achieved already if economic growth is not there. And for that, we need the support of partners, economic partners, support for the government that has been elected, support for the civil society that is complementing what the government is doing, because the government is not prepared. The government is not, although they have the willing to do well, they are not prepared and they are not maybe ready to this huge task. And also because there is a kind of disillusion after the euphoria of the revolution, and because people thought naively that revolution would bring the solution to all kinds of problems, and now there is somehow a disillusion. So this moment is critical. We are at the juncture where we could succeed and be thriving and concretize many things. And I would say support and coherent support with a strategy, not scattered actions that has no impact. I would say a framework. That's why I mentioned before a Euro-Mediterranean Development Bank, because at the G8 there was a promise for a Marshall Plan, which did not concretize. But what we need now is really a framework, a strategy that will take care of the situation and put the necessary condition for success.
Thank you so much. Aliyah, being Foreign Affairs representative and higher committee member of your party, what is your expectation? What do you see as the most important needs?
Well, there are a lot of expectations, actually, economically, through investments, establishing new investments in Egypt and partnering to build a new infrastructure for the entire country, politically by dealing with multi organizations, not just the government, but you need to open new channels of communication with everyone, with the political movements, with the even the protesting movements and all that, and by NGOs and civil society organizations. I know it's very difficult right now after the NGO crisis that happened in Egypt, but I'm very positive that after electing a new president, we're working right now, actually I'm working right now in passing a new bill through the parliament to assure and guarantee the NGOs that they have rights to claim and they can work freely and not under any pressure. And through the media as well. The media plays a very important role, not just in Egypt, but internationally. And you need to strengthen the media support or the media presence from Europe and the United States in Egypt to actually deliver the right message to the people outside so they can know what. A lot of people in the United States I talk to, they don't understand why the foreign aid is going to Egypt. And the people in Egypt, they don't understand what the foreign aid is all about. There has to be some transparency, and transparency is delivered through the media. So these are 3 or 4 things I can think of.
Thank you so much.
Well, mine will be summarized in 5 letters, and it's called Syria. If we do not have revolutionary change in Syria, revolutionary change without sectarian warfare of the sort which Bashar al-Assad is trying to use as a tool to remain in power, then we are going to have a terrible situation in two aspects. One, of course, is that we will then move towards the broader Sunni-Shia confrontation, Syria, Iraq, the Gulf. You see elements of it in Bahrain, you see elements of it in Iraq. If we descend into sectarian warfare in Syria, then this will be a true front in the strategic sense, opening up in the region. That, of course, would be a major threat to the interests of outside powers, because, yes, we do need the oil. The Chinese need the oil, the Indians need the oil, the Europeans need the oil, and the Americans need the oil. And the second dimension, of course, is that if Syria turns into a Sunni versus non-Sunni contest, then you will have feedback effects in the other Sunni Arab states. And this will nourish the Salafs, the Salafi. It will nourish the radicals. This is the sort of scenario which in some ways would resemble the transformation of post-1848 Europe. This is the one I'm scared of, which is why outside powers, as well as the countries of the region, need to continue to focus very, very hard on trying to get Syria right, notably in the Security Council. It is of utmost importance because it overdetermines just about everything else, including those things which have just been said by the 2 other panelists.
I want to add one last thing. I know
one sentence.
Let's not forget Africa as well, because Africa has been forgotten for a long time. Egypt definitely ignored dealing with it. They're facing a lot of problems, and not because they don't have the resources that we are all looking for, like the oil and all that, that they should be ignored. I think we should work hard on having a presence, a positive presence in Africa, and the results of ignoring them appeared in the building of the dam in Ethiopia, and we should take a look at this.
To not forget.
All of us.
Ladies and gentlemen, it was mentioned already at the beginning that we are at the beginning of a development, and it will take 10, 20, 30 years maybe. So you could not expect us to give final solutions and final answers to all the questions that are in the room. Let me thank you for your interest, for being here, and may I ask you to support me in thanking the speakers who provided excellent speeches. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.